Chapter 1366. If I have to die, I don't want to die in Bailiang, where the land is barren and the territory is narrow. I want to die in the rich central plains, under Grand Peace City, on the shores of the South Sea. Baimang's 90,000 vanguard troops poured into the mouth of the gourd like a flood bursting through a dam. Those forts were like unremarkable pebbles on a shoal, instantly submerged. The northernmost beehive fort at the mouth of the gourd, together with the 6 beacons and 197 Yuzhou officers, all died in battle, without a single arrow remaining. Clear Phoenix Fort was broken through. 362 men, all unsheathed cold blades, died in battle. White Horse Fort was broken through. 213 men, without a single place within the fort, all died in battle. At the heart of the northern group of forts at the mouth of the gourd was Jujube Horse Village. Corpses were strewn everywhere. Apart from the Baimang cavalry, who had been seriously injured and flustered, who added a blade to the back of the corpses, not a single person died while fleeing. Their wounds were all in front of their bodies. Apart from the last Chicken Crow village in the south, all of the 18 forts around Jujube Horse Village were broken through by the Baimang army. Not a single person surrendered. Chicken Crow Village was different from the other forts, which were mostly built in river valleys. It was located on a precipitous cliff of a short mountain. Countless Baimang cavalry quickly passed by the 2 sides of the mountain, whistling through the air like the wind. Most likely in pursuit of speed, they wanted to push out of Crouching Bao City as quickly as possible. They didn't pay any attention to this isolated and unimportant little village. Within the village, there wasn't even a commander-in-chief, but a mere deputy commander-in-chief. When all of the soldiers were gathered together, there were more than 230 of them. Everyone could clearly hear the loud trampling of Baimang horses at the foot of the mountain, as well as the strange cries of those northern barbarians as they galloped forward. Chicken Crow Village's deputy commander-in-chief, Tang Yanchao, was a tall, middle-aged man. He was a classic veteran ruffian from the border. Alcohol was prohibited in the army, and there were several times where he had messed up matters because of alcohol. This man, who could have become a commander-in-chief long ago, was wasting his time in Chicken Crow Village. Every time he drank, Tang Yanchao would brag to his mostly young subordinates about how he had once been the personal guard of the previous cavalry deputy commander, Wei Taizhan, and how he had followed the commander-in-chief in his early years and slaughtered his way through Baimang territory. The youngsters in the village at first, but after years and years of listening to those things, calluses. As a result, every time Tang Yanchao bragged after drinking, many people would shake their heads and make faces. If Tang Yanchao wasn't drunk to death and saw these little bastards imitating him behind his back, he wouldn't get angry to see these little bastards to not know how to respect a hero. Respect. In the past, even when Yuzhou generals came to patrol the village, Tang Yanchao, who didn't wear his armor neatly, was dressed meticulously for the first time. Even his sloppy beard had been shaved off, making him almost unrecognizable as the great deputy commander-in-chief. If it were any other time, there would definitely be a few bold young soldiers who would approach him with a mischievous smile and say, "Oh, the deputy commander-in-chief looks like a dog. Why haven't you found your sister-in-law yet?" However, at this moment, most people only had heavy hearts and couldn't squeeze out a smile. The elders from the stronghold stood beside Tang Yanchao and were also silently inspecting the armor and crossbow sabers. Tang Yanchao looked around and said indifferently, "Those who aren't over 20 years old, and those who are the only children in your families, stand obediently where you are. Those who aren't, take a step forward." Not counting Tang Yanchao and the 7 people on his left and right, more than half of the 221 people in front had walked out. Tang Yanchao looked over and suddenly pointed at a baby-faced soldier and scolded with a smile. "By Yofu, if I remember correctly, you're only 18 years old. You don't even look like you're 15. Scram back." Look, the great deputy commander-in-chief had finally put on some airs of this official, but he was immediately exposed after a few words. He deserved to be called this old man for the rest of his life. The soldier named Bai Yofu blushed and said loudly, "Father said that it's a matter of course for soldiers to fight and be paid. Then, it's also a matter of course to go to the battlefield and kill the enemy." Tang Yanchao put one hand on the Bailiang's saber at his waist and said with a smile, "Then, didn't your mother secretly tell you not to fight with your life?" Bai Youfu's face was full of embarrassment. He said softly, "She really did." Laughter immediately broke out. After Tang Yanchao raised his hand, the village returned to its previous silence. This deputy commander-in-chief, who probably hadn't even heard of the Yuzhou provincial governor, said in a deep voice, "General Yen previously ordered that our Calabash fort only needed to defend to the death and not go out to meet the enemy." Tang Yanchao paused for a moment. "Therefore I, Tang Yanchao, am going out to kill the barbarians this time because I, Tang Yanchao, have disobeyed military orders. Those who stand in place and stay in the fort, and those who step out don't need to go down the mountain. Yes, once we go down the mountain, we'll be stuck at the foot of the mountain for the rest of our lives. There's nothing to hide. No one's an idiot. I, Tang Yanchao, have lived for 40 years and have gone to the battlefield more than 40 times. If we count it up, it's more than once a year. Other than not being able to find a wife in this life, there's nothing else to say. You kids who haven't even reached the age of 20, it's still too early for you to live long enough. Live well." Tang Yanchao pointed to the north and said fiercely, "This old man can't become a commander-in-chief or a high-ranking official. It's not embarrassing. But Li Jing, Hu Lin, and Lu Ziyuan in the fort in the north must have died in battle. If this old man hides and doesn't die, I can't afford to lose this face. Even if this old man can afford to lose this face, our pheasant fort can't." Tang Yanchao roared angrily, "Those who step out, follow this old man. When we get down there and there's no military law to control us, Tang Yanchao will drink to his heart's content with my brothers." On this day, Pheasant Fort's vice-captain, Tang Yanchao, was the first to die at the foot of the mountain outside the fort. Soon after, the remaining 80 people who were under the age of 20 also died in battle. Among them, Bai Youfu was stabbed in the neck by a Beimeng cavalryman who was charging at full speed. Before he died, he only had one thought. It would be even better if he could fight his way into Beimeng territory and die there. Not long after, a white-haired, dignified old general stopped his horse at the foot of the mountain. After dismounting, he looked at the bloody battlefield where the corpses had been split into two groups. The old man calmly asked a general whose armor was stained with blood beside him, "How many people did we lose?" The general wiped his face fiercely. "The bows and crossbows of the fort in Yuzhou are extremely sharp, and everyone fought to the death. I only know that over 4,000 of us died in battle, and even more were injured." It was precisely the commander of the Eastern Front, Yang Yuanzhan. His expression was grave as he sighed heavily. They still hadn't seen Crouching Bao City of the 3 cities at the Gourd Gate, nor had they seen Yan Wenwan's elite infantry. Yang Yuanzhan looked at the pheasant fort on the mountain that was destined to be empty and muttered to himself, "There's no way to fight this battle." Chapter 1367. After Su Fengyan entered Jizhou, he donned a mask made of roots. This mask was the handiwork of the witch of the southern border, Shu Xiu. When Su Fengyan had snuck into Beimeng, it was thanks to these ingenious items. The 4 of them crossed the border. The spies of the Fu Shui chamber had long since prepared 4 impeccable travel documents. At present, the tyrants of Bailiang were like a swarm of ants that had been disturbed by a child. They all fled for their lives. Su Fengyan's meager group of 4 was completely inconspicuous. Fan Xiaochai knew that he was going to Hengshui City in Ji North to meet with Yu Landao and Wei Jingteng. However, although the 4 of them traveled day and night without rest, they did not take the shortest route. Instead, they traveled directly into the heart of Jizhou. Ultimately, they arrived at Dezhan City, which had been built during the last years of the Great Feng Dynasty. Su Fengyan was in no hurry to enter the city. Instead, he reined in his horse and stopped on the official road outside the city. With a complicated expression, he gazed at the silent city. As the former capital of northern Han, it could be said that the city was filled with the relatives of officials, and nobles. Back then, Su Xiao, who was one of the top generals, had led an army to attack northern Han. All of Jizhou had been trampled to pieces by the armored cavalry of the Su family. Only Dezhan City had managed to escape the calamity. When the army slowly approached the city, disaster was imminent. That night, countless scholars drank and sang. It was said that one could smell the strong scent of alcohol from 3 li outside the city. As a result, there was the story of 300 Han retainers drunk to death in one night. Fan Xiaochai had wandered from place to place due to the destruction of her country and her family. However, as a descendant of the loyal and fierce Fan clan, even though she had been fleeing for her life was generally stable. She had once lived in Dajun City for more than half a year. She did not have to worry about food or clothing, enjoying the lanterns during the Lantern Festival and going on field trips. At that time, she still had many naive thoughts. If Northern Han were still around, perhaps she would have lived a more extravagant life. She would have married a handsome young man from an aristocratic family of equal social status. They would have helped each other in difficult times, assisted her husband and taught her children, and grown old together. Her grandfather, father, and so many uncles wouldn't have died on the battlefield. In the end, she was the only one left. If she hadn't been chosen by Zhao Go, then the Fan family wouldn't even have a single person to worship their ancestors. Mi Fengjie, who was obsessed with martial arts, did not have such sentimental feelings. The sword case on his back was already wrapped in a cotton cloth. Just by looking at his posture, this hidden sword cave master, who had left the orthodox Jianghu for too many years, did not have the demeanor of a grandmaster. He looked more like a rigid old servant who did not know the ways of the world. Su Fengyan softly said, "Enter the city." The 4 riders immediately galloped toward the city gate. Aside from Fan Xiaochai, whose appearance was enough to arouse pity, who was fiercely glared at by the city guards, nothing else happened. After entering the city from the south, Su Fengyan familiarly led them to the north of the city. Along the way, they passed through streets and alleys. Fan Xiaochai was inevitably surprised. Logically speaking, Su Fengyan should not be so familiar with the layout of Dajun City. In the end, the 4 of them stopped at a place called the Green Bamboo Restaurant in the north of the city. The restaurant's business was booming, and it was difficult to find an empty chair on the first floor. The waiter who welcomed the guests was not very good either. He was so greedy that he couldn't get out. He casually led the 4 people's mounts to the stable. After that, he didn't care whether the guests lived or died. If they wanted to eat and drink, just wait. He didn't believe that the 4 foreign guests would change places. The 4 of them had no choice but to wait for an empty table in front of the counter that was piled with green bamboo boards. Su Fengyan was bored to death. He picked up a green bamboo stick. The name of the dish was engraved on it, along with the price. It was not cheap at all. It was almost as expensive as the price in the capital. Of course, now there were 4 more fat lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Su Fengyan was admiring the beautiful calligraphy on the bamboo board. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the clever young waiter going up to the second floor. Su Fengyan smiled knowingly. He most likely figured out the origin of the 4 horses. Before leaving Yu Province, the 4 war horses of Yu Province were replaced by Hezhou courier horses. Before entering the territory of Ji Province, the spies of Whisk Chamber secretly contacted them had also replaced them with 4 high-quality Ji Province war horses. Su Fengyan noticed the suspicious behavior of the waiter. Apart from Yu Dilong, Mi Fengjie and Fan Xiaochai also noticed the peculiarity of this green bamboo restaurant. Especially Fan Xiaochai, who had just been promoted to the position of Grand Master of Whisk Chamber because of her meritorious service. Under her timid appearance, she was emitting a very well-hidden bloodthirsty aura. Mi Fengjie glanced at her with disgust. It was one thing for such a beautiful woman to be a man of sacrifice and a spy, but why did she like to kill people? Moreover, she usually tortured people to death. Fan Xiaochai looked back at Mi Fengjie provocatively. This made the hidden sword cave master, who was already full of resentment towards this crazy woman, even more murderous. If it were not for the king of Bailiang beside him and the sword box on Mi Fengjie's back that contained 8 specially selected famous swords, he would not mind chopping this woman into 8 pieces. Many of the rich guests in the restaurant were actually quite smart. They purposely spoke the truth after drinking. They were all shouting something like, "Lady boss, come give me a toast. Don't worry, I'm a gentleman. I only drink wine and not people. Lady of the Su family, how come I've never seen your husband show his face?" What a bastard! In this frigid weather, aren't you afraid that Lady Sue will suffer at night? Shopkeeper, I've eaten more than 10 meals in this green bamboo restaurant. My expenses are enough to get me the title of courtesan of a second-rate brothel in Dajan City. You're so good. You don't even let me touch your hand. How can you do business like this in this world? The first floor was not only filled with dirty and coarse men. There were also many elegant scholars dressed in green robes. Most of them were in their 20s, and they were trying their best to endure the filthy words that were ringing in their ears. As the world in Ji province was not peaceful, the situation of scholars was getting worse and worse. If it were a few years ago, they would have already slammed the table and stood up to curse these ruffians. They would not even dare to talk back, let alone hit them. However, Ji province was in constant turmoil. First, General Yang Xianxia, the divine pillar of Ji province, took away all the old soldiers of Ji province. Then Yuan Tingshan, the dragon that crossed the river, came to Ji province and became the king of Ji province. Not only was he the son-in-law of Gu Jiantang, he also abducted a woman from the Li family of Yanbao in Ji province to be his concubine. Furthermore, he held the military power in his hands. All the sects and clans in Ji province followed his lead. In just a blink of an eye, Yuan Tingshan had dealt with a few local tyrants who refused to submit to him. Now, it was rumored that Beimang had sent tens of thousands of cavalry to the south. The only good news in Ji province was that the grievances of the Han family had been cleared. The current emperor personally gave the posthumous title of Wuxia, the old patriarch of the Han family, Han Baidu. Not only was the posthumous title of Wuxia not the second rank of Zhong, or at most, the posthumous title of Wuxia, which was ranked 5th among the 8 posthumous titles of Wuxia. Not to mention the widespread posthumous titles before Li Yang seized the world. Ever since the reign of Yonghui, the Zhao family of Li Yang had always been suspicious of valuing the civil and belittling the military when it came to the posthumous titles of their subjects. Putting aside the extreme exception of the king of Bailiang, Su Shao, the few old generals who had made meritorious contributions during the spring and autumn period were given posthumous titles of Zhong, Jian, Jing, and so on. Perhaps only General Gu Jiantang had the chance to ascend to the throne after his death, thus he was given the posthumous title of Wu Ning. From this, it could be seen that the new emperor of Liang had made an exception for the Han family, which had said, if the monarch wanted a subject to die, the subject would die generously. Even more exciting was the fact that before the Han family had been cleared of wrongdoing by the imperial court, an astonishing piece of news had already spread from Jizhou. An orphan of the Han family who had escaped calamity had appeared. Following his appearance, a touching story began to circulate in the streets of Jizhou. It was said that the reason why the eldest grandson of the Han family did not die was not because the Han family wanted to leave behind an incense stick, but rather because a loyal and righteous guest of the family had joined forces with a Jianghu martial grandmaster who had received the Han family's favor in his early years. They had carried away the young child behind the Han family's back. Unfortunately, the guest who had died during their escape had said, "The Han family has treated me like a national hero, so I will repay them with a national hero." Although this person's name was obscure, the martial grandmaster was a renowned Jianghu hero from 20 years ago in Jizhou. His strength was extremely close to the first level, and he was known to be invincible among second-level martial grandmasters. His name was Ho Wanhu, nicknamed the Marquis of 10,000 Households. Before the fall of Northern Han, he had served as a military officer and was known to be the enemy of 10,000 people in Jizhou. After the fall of Northern Han, he had raised over 2,000 roaming mounted bandits at the northern border of Jizhou. This person had threatened that there would be a day when he would chop off Su Zhao's head and use it as a wine jug. Unexpectedly, he had quickly disappeared. As it turned out, he had saved the eldest grandson of the Han family. It was rumored that he was currently imprisoned in the underground prison of Yanbao. It could be seen just how many years the Han family had endured humiliation and how many years this Jizhou hero had not seen the light of day. During this period of time, countless people had come to visit the Yanbao Li family under all kinds of pretenses. If it weren't for Yuan Tingshan personally dispatching a cavalry with bright crossbows to deliberately station on the main road of Yanbao, perhaps Yenbao wouldn't even have a moment of peace. A graceful figure appeared at the top of the stairs, but for some reason, it immediately turned around and disappeared in a flash. The sharp-eyed men downstairs immediately hissed. They slapped the table with their hands and knocked the bowl with their chopsticks. As it turned out, the shopkeeper's wife, Lady Su, had given the drinkers downstairs a performance of hugging the pipa half covering the face. How could these men, who never lacked money, let it go? They screamed again and booed to death. This caused those young scholars who couldn't bear it any longer to glare angrily at the neighboring tables. Those with better tempers rolled their eyes, while those with worse tempers directly spat on the ground. There were also some who used hand gestures to greet the scholars' many generations of ancestors. Speaking of which, it was strange. It was true that the proprietress's appearance was outstanding, but she couldn't be considered a devastatingly beautiful woman. However, regardless of whether it was the coarse men or the refined scholars, even if they didn't fall in love at first sight, the more they looked, the more they liked her. The former had shallow eyes, drooling over the woman's heavy breasts, round and perky buttocks, as well as her soul-stirring foxy eyes, as well as her unique style that allowed her to exchange vulgarities with them. The latter had all sorts of reasons. Some said that the Lady Su's occasional dazed expression while lying behind the counter was very charming. Some said that they saw the proprietress's staunch and chaste nature. There were even more who said that she was naturally close to scholars. It was possible that she was the daughter of one of the old Northern Han's aristocratic families who had wandered among the common people. Chapter 1368. However, there was only one reason why customers only dared to take liberties with their mouths and did not dare to lay their hands on them. There was only one reason why Green Bamboo Restaurant's business was booming. It was because the eldest grandson of the Han family, who had been promoted to the position of commandant of South Luguan by the imperial court, was Su's sworn brother. The waiter had a bright smile on his face, but he was full of suspicions as he ran downstairs. He respectfully invited Su Fengyan and the others to take a seat upstairs. Su Fengyan took out a piece of silver and tossed it to the waiter. The waiter's smile became even brighter as he shouted, "Thank you, young master, for your reward." The waiter was not surprised that the four of them went upstairs, but it was strange that they went directly to a private room on the third floor. There were so many rich guests in Dijon who came here with ulterior motives, but none of them had such an honor. The waiter led the four of them to the door of the room on the third floor and stopped. Su Fengyan pushed the door open and entered. Mi Fengjie stood at the door while Fan Xiaochai followed Su Fengyan over the threshold. Fan Xiaochai glanced at the woman who stood motionless with a face full of surprise. She was indeed somewhat enchanting, especially the view on her chest, which could make ordinary men want to run over and hold it with both hands to reduce the burden. However, that was all there was to it. Fan Xiaochai's beauty was above the woman's, and her style was the complete opposite. Generally speaking, each of them had their own merits, so they minded their own business. After Su Fengyan calmly sat down, he smiled and said, "Qing Jinyang, why are you standing there like a fool? Pour the wine. Even if you want to go back to your old business of selling human meat buns, you still have to get the customers drunk first, right?" The woman who was called Qing Zhu Nyang by Su Fengyan, who was wearing Zhang Sheingen's mask, covered her mouth. It was unknown whether she was crying or laughing. She was none other than Qing Zhunyang, whom Su Fengyan had met in Beimang's Juzizhou. She was the owner of an unscrupulous inn that sold black wine. Had it not been for that night at the foot of the mountain, when she had unintentionally revealed her true feelings in a drunken stupor, Su Fengyan would not have gotten involved with the Zhongyi stronghold's head Han Fong, nor would he have killed his way to the Shen's thatched hut on Mount Liui's Changle Peak. Then, under the oppression of the Shen clan's thatched hut, the eldest grandson of the Han clan might not even be able to be the king of a mountain, and could only switch mountains with Zhang Julu and start anew. Then, in Ji province, there wouldn't be the eldest grandson of the Han clan who walked right into the trap and waited to be executed. There wouldn't be the change of day after day, where Han Fong suddenly turned from a prisoner to a first-rate martyr in the Liang dynasty and became the last straw that crushed Grand Secretary Zhang Julu to death. It could be said that in these 2 years, the whisk room's men of sacrifice and spies that had been hiding in Ji province were all revolving around a single person, carrying out a secretive and cautious complex operation. This lucky person was precisely Han Fong, who had led 21 riders back to Ji Province. Even though the whisk room had spent a great deal of effort, manpower, and resources, Han Fong was able to successfully distinguish herself from the others time and time again, probably because of the protection of more than 10 generations of the Han clan's heroic ancestors. Even Su Weisheng and Chu Lushan, who were far away in Bailiang, who were in charge of Ji Province's spy affairs, clicked their tongues in amazement. This chess piece was personally planted by Su Fengyan. It was still far from blossoming and bearing fruit. However, for Bailiang, who was now in an even worse situation, with and without Han Fong in Ji Province, there was definitely a world of difference. Su Fengyan's trip to Dajian City in Ji Province this time was not to meet Han Fong, but to meet Zhang Xiuqing, who claimed to be an outer disciple of the Tao Te sect. At that time, Zhongyi's decade had fallen and scattered. Only this person had firmly placed his bet on Han Fong and regarded her as a Tao-enlightened immortal who could help him rise to the top. Reality proved that this Beimeng Taoist, who was born as a scholar in the Southern Dynasty, had not only made the right bet, but also made a lot of money. Now, he had the official position of Liang official and was assisting Lieutenant Han Fong in Nanlu Pass. Of course, Su Fengyan would not recklessly meet Han Fong directly, even though the Liang Zhaogo, who had been severely injured, was no longer as strong as before in Ji Province. The old military chief Yang Shenxing had left, and the new noble Yuan Tingshan had arrived, causing the Zhaogo in Ji Province to be severely reduced. Han Fong's luck was good, but Su Fengyan did not have much confidence in his own luck. After Qing Zhu Nyang sat down, she poured a cup of aged Huadiao wine for Su Fengyan. The wine's aroma quickly filled the air. After the excitement, she was obviously a little uneasy. She asked softly, "Su Lang, why did you come to Dajian City?" Qing Zhu Nyang did not know about Han Fong's identity as the orphan of the Han family until he was imprisoned. As for Su Fengyan's identity, even Han Fong was only told by an old spy from the Fu Shui house after he had settled down in Ji Province. Of course, Han Fong would not say a word about this kind of secret to Qing Zhu Nyang, who had no relatives or friends. This time, Su Fengyan came to Dajian City to meet Zhang Xiuqing, who also did not dare to reveal anything. Han Fong's situation was turned upside down, and Qing Zhu Nyang naturally rose along with it. She opened this restaurant in Dajian City, where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. She, who lived at the foot of Jiui Mountain, was so miserable that she did not even use her name. Perhaps even the lowest-level Beimeng spies in Ju Province had not heard of her, not to mention Zhao Go in Ji Province. To this day, Qing Zhunyang only regarded him as the son of a rich family from Longyao Province or Gusai Province. As for Su Lang's skills, she was not clear from the beginning to the end. That night in Zhongyi village and the Shen family's thatched cottage, she was dead drunk on the table outside the hotel. Later, the Taoist priest Zhang Xiuqing casually mentioned a few words. He only said that young Master Su's martial arts skills were rarely seen in his life. Even if he was not at the first level, he was not far away. But what she really wanted to know, Zhang Xiuqing did not say. What she really wanted to hear, Zhang Xiuqing did not say either. She did not even know if she would be able to see him again in this lifetime. Today, when she finally saw him, she actually wanted him to leave Dajian City as soon as possible. After all, this was an important military base in Liang. You are a young master from the southern Beimeng dynasty. Aren't you afraid of losing your head? Su Fengyan joked. What? Can I come? Afraid of freeloading? Qing Zhu Nyang did not say anything. She subconsciously reached out to touch the hair on her temples, afraid that he would find fault with her. Although she did not look at the weak woman for a long time, the quick exchange of glances was enough to make her feel ashamed of her own inferiority. What a handsome young lady. Her temperament was excellent. At first glance, she could tell that she was a virtuous young lady from a scholarly family. The key point was that the woman was younger than her. She suddenly seemed to wake up and said in a low voice, Zhenren Zhang actually stayed in the restaurant yesterday. He eats, drinks, and sleeps in the innermost room near the window. He saw you earlier than me and said that he would be here in a while. He had to wait until there were no customers coming in and out. He asked me to pass on a message to you, saying that he hoped that you would be magnanimous enough to forgive him. Su Fengnian grunted in acknowledgement. When they arrived at the Green Bamboo restaurant in Dezhan City and were about to meet Zhang Xiuqing, who was now using the pseudonym of Zhang Fuling, Su Fengnian could not help but think of another hidden spy. It was not in Ji Province, but outside Tuma Pass, right outside the mouth of the gourd. The reason why he said he was going to meet Yu Luandao and Wei Jingtang in horizontal water city of Ji Province was that he wanted to recruit these two spies that he had been operating for several years. Compared to Han Fang in Ji Province, the other spy named Song Diao could play a role earlier. At that time, when Su Fengnian followed the fish dragon gang led by Lu Narong to escort them out of Ji Province, Song Diao was one of the few forces of horse bandits hired by the deputy chief Xiao Chang. Su Fengnian took a fancy to Song Diao's resolute and ruthless character and asked Song Diao to ask Su Fengnian for money and food. Song Diao did as Su Fengnian had expected. If not for his mediocre martial arts and pitiful background, he actually did not lack anything. If he were in Jiangnan of Liang Central Plains, it would not be difficult for him to pass the Jinshe exam or become a famous scholar. Therefore, with the support of Captain Gui Yi, who had real power, Song Diao soon became one of the top leaders of horse bandits at the border of Yuzhou. On the surface, he had more than 1,000 strong men under his command. Although this number was not big when compared to the armies of other regions, it might not even be comparable to a paid captain. However, Song Diao was able to roam freely outside Ji Province with only 36 horse bandits. The 1,000 horse bandits under his command, who had not been equipped with excellent equipment, were probably equal to the 3,000 cavalrymen of Ji Province. If it was said that Northern Mang already had an idea of Yu Luandao's 10,000 cavalrymen and had prepared a backup plan, then Song Diao's 1,000 mounted bandits who came and went like the wind, as well as the Song clan bandits who could suddenly grow stronger, they could stab Northern Mang's eastern army at any time and any place. As for whether they would stab Northern Mang's waist or shoulder, Su Fengnian would personally make the arrangements this time. In addition, when Beimang's cobwebs and Jianghu forces infiltrated Yuzhou, Su Fengnian also took the opportunity to quietly disperse many of his men outside the Great Wall. Just as immortal Cui Wazi of Dao De sect thought, half of the tide-listening pavilion's eagles and hounds were hidden in the Calabash fort as a smokescreen. They had already joined forces with Song Diao's horse gang. That day in the steel forest behind Mount Qingliang, Su Fengnian did not refute Mi Chang, who pointed at his nose and scolded him. He only said that he did not do a good job. Perhaps he, the king of Beiliang, did not do a good job, but Su Fengnian must have done more than the outside world imagined. Su Fengnian took a sip of the huadiao tea that Qing Junyang had just warmed. His smiling face suddenly fell into silence. Chapter 1369. The 15-year-old huadiao wine had been one of the tributes of Gangnam-do since the first year of Yonghui. It was produced in the Great Feng dynasty and had a unique custom. When a rich family gave birth to a daughter, they would brew a few jars of wine every few days they were born. The wine jars would be painted with colors and buried under old osmanthus trees. When the daughter grew up and married, this wine would be used as a dowry. When the eldest princess of Beiliang was married to Jiangnan, the king of Beiliang, Su Shao, threatened to gather 1,000 jars of huadiao wine for his daughter's dowry. In a hurry, he only managed to gather 800 jars. Originally, this was not a shameful matter. At that time, people were butchering their daughters. Who dared to gossip? Who didn't know that no matter how fierce Su Shao was, Su Shao would only hear it? If the gossip of his two daughters reached his ears, as long as it wasn't thousands of miles away, even the emperor wouldn't be able to protect him. In the end, it was His Royal Highness, who was the first to stop his eldest sister from marrying, who personally led his personal guards and spent an entire day barging into almost all the houses of the rich and powerful in Liangzhou City. Only on the morning of His Royal Highness's wedding day did he finally bring back the last jar of top-quality huadiao wine with red eyes. Su Fengnian did not speak. Qing Junyang also did not make a sound. Zhang Xiuqing, who was no longer wearing a Taoist robe but casual clothes, gently pushed open the door and entered. He originally wanted to kneel down and pay his respects. Seeing that Qing Junyang was still in the room, he was momentarily in a dilemma. After Su Fengnian came back to his senses, he raised his wine cup and smiled. Old friends have met. Sit down and talk. Zhang Xiuqing's fear and trepidation were not faked. His mother, the person in front of him, was the northwest vassal king of Liang. The hand holding the wine cup was also holding an entire 300,000 cavalrymen at the border. This young man with the title of King of Bailiang and the title of Pillar of Bailiang was fighting to the death against the million-strong army of Beimang and the entire Beimang dynasty. Taking 10,000 steps back, the man who took the heads of the king of the northern courtyard, Su Huainan, and the fifth raccoon of Mount Tibing, the guy who killed Wang Xianji, Zhang Xiuqing, a pretentious Taoist priest, didn't he meet a real immortal? Zhang Xiuqing glanced at Qing Junyang, who was still in the dark, and asked carefully with a perfect Jizhou accent, "Wang? Young Master Su, are you all right?" Su Fengnian nodded. "It's fine." Zhang Xiuqing heaved a sigh of relief and sat upright. He said in a deep voice, "This lowly one dares not to talk about official business. The first master asked me to do something for him first. When we meet in the future, he will make it up to me." After saying this, Zhang Xiuqing stood up, knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times. Su Fengnian did not stop him. Zhang Xiuqing, whose forehead was slightly red, sat down again. He quickly calmed himself down and continued, "In the king." Zhang Xiuqing could not hold himself back from cursing. He slapped himself hard on the face and said, "Under the instruction of young Master Su, when General Yu was on the way to North Ji, they passed by South Foot Pass. The great leader had also led 3,000 soldiers to intercept them, and a fierce fight broke out. As expected, Yuan Tingshan, who only brought a few dozens of retinues with him, showed up after the fight, and the great leader let down his guard against him. On General Yu's journey to the north, he only drew his sword at our Nanlu Pass. The other dozen or so troops had shrunk into a complete mess. It's not that this little one is boasting, but the Northern Liang cavalry is indeed worthy of being called the #1 army in the world. Even though they were separated by River Province, the Jizhou army was still scared to death." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "If the backbone of Jizhou, Yang Shenxing, was still here, it might not be like this. Maybe." Zhang Xiuqing only spoke a few words before he felt his throat dry up. He glanced at the wine cup on the table and did not dare to take it. Su Fengnian poured a cup for him. Only then did he lower his head and bend over to take it. He tilted his head slightly and drank it in one gulp. Qing Junyang was dumbfounded. What kind of show was this? What General Yu? What Bailiang cavalry? She had heard of Yang Shenxing before. He was the old man who acted like a tyrant in Jizhou but immediately became unaccustomed to other places. It was said that he suffered a great defeat at a place called Guangling Road in Liang. He was a classic example of a man who could not keep his integrity in his old age. She was more familiar with Yuan Tingshan. It could not be helped. Everyone in Jizhou knew about Master Yuan. He was a legendary figure who had both praise and blame. Those who approved of him worshipped him to the point of prostrating themselves before him, praising him to the skies. Those who did not approve of him gritted their teeth and scolded him for being a mad dog who had once been beaten by the king of Bailiang. He did not rely on riding a horse to kill enemies, but relied on riding a woman to achieve his current status. Zhang Xiuqing was about to speak when someone knocked on the door. Zhang Xiuqing stood up like a bird startled by the twang of a bow, startling Qing Junyang. Su Fengnian put down his hand and signaled for Zhang Xiuqing to calm down. He said calmly, "Come in." After Mi Fengjie entered the room, the old man glanced at Fan Shaochai with extreme annoyance and said softly, "That Ruan guy came to find us." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Should I say that this guy is haunting us or is he infatuated?" It turned out that after the 4 of them had entered the border of Ji province, they had inadvertently encountered a group of 40 men who were escorting a descendant of an aristocratic family. The arrangement of the group was not inferior to that of Ji province's elite cavalry. That fellow had only glanced at Fan Shaochai, who was riding past him, and his soul had followed Fan Shaochai's horse. He didn't care about anything else and immediately turned his horse around, desperately trying to catch up with Su Fengnian's group. As it turned out, when the young man named Ruan Gang was young, he met Fan Xiaochai in Dajian City. At that time, he was shocked. After Fan Xiaochai left, this infatuated man used the excuse of traveling to study and had not taken a wife for many years. In the end, he felt that their reunion was God's will. Fan Xiaochai said that she did not know this Ruan Gang and had never stopped in Dajian City. At that time, Ruan Gang looked at Su Fengnian with hidden bitterness and thought that Fan Xiaochai had married and become someone else's wife. What was interesting was that Ruan Gang did not try to bully others. He only begged Su Fengnian to help him and Fan Xiaochai reconcile. In the end, this son of the deputy general of Jizhou even got off his horse and knelt on the road with tears and snot all over his face. Fortunately, he did not see Fan Xiaochai's ferocious expression on the horse's back. At that time, the third great master of the Fu Shui chamber really wanted to cut him into pieces. Fan Xiaochai looked at Su Fengnian and said expressionlessly, "I will find a chance to kill him. Don't worry, it will be done without anyone knowing." Su Fengnian shook his head and smiled. "You women can have a man who cares about you so much. Even if you are not together, you can't hurt him too much. After all, there are not many good men like him in this world." Fan Xiaochai still kept a straight face and asked, "Why don't I put him in the side room of the Fu Shui chamber? He is the son of the deputy general of Jizhou after all. He can be useful." Su Fengnian asked, "You don't like him. Besides, you are one of the top 10 figures in the Fu Shui chamber. Why do you care about this little bit of merit?" Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. "I don't care what the women of the Fu Shui chamber do when I can't see them. But you are standing right in front of me. Forget it." Fan Xiaochai made an "oh" sound and did not say anything else. Su Fengnian said to me, "Fengjia, just tell Ruan Gang that I will be visiting him tomorrow. Tell him to prepare good wine and good food. Let him continue to wait. Having a thought in his heart, even if it is for the rest of his life, is probably better than having a dead heart." No one in the room said anything. Zhang Xiuqing did not dare, Mi Fengjia did not care, and Fan Xiaochai closed her eyes to rest. Only Qing Junyang said softly, "It is like this." Su Fengnian suddenly thought of one of the Bailiang's chess pieces, the guest of the prince's mansion, Shu Xiu, who wore the godly face. Su Fengnian's intuition told him that this chess piece had not only taken root beside the prince of Xiangfan City in Qing province, but also changed its color. His master, Li Yishan, had always regarded Go as a small Dao. Most importantly, he believed that Go was divided into black and white, and it would always be black and white. But the human heart was the most changeable. How could it be divided into black and white? Even if they were thousands of li away from the Bailiang, even if the Bailiang cavalry could not take care of themselves, to kill Shu Xiu, who could not see the light of day on the Qing province stage, in one night, Fu Shui chamber could still pay a price. But this was meaningless. The owner of the godly face, who had gone to Beimang's hidden chess piece, had finally begun to make waves. As for Chen Xiaobao, Chen Wang, who lived high up in Taiyan City, and Wang Lifting, who was a close friend of Lingzhou's golden thread weaving company, Sun Yin, Su Fengnian did not treat them as chess pieces that had to listen to Bailiang's orders. He just wanted to let nature take its course. Su Fengnian was more looking forward to Chao Wei. Under the cover of Yu Luan Dao and nearly 10,000 Bailiang cavalry, Chao Wei's more elite cavalry might really be able to become a surprise force that could make the final decision. Of course, this was on the premise that Bailiang's third front could grit its teeth and resist the invasion of Beimang's cavalry to the south. Su Fengnian picked up his wine cup and walked to the window. He looked at the endless stream of people on the busy street and drank a mouthful of Huadiao wine. "Your peace order is in Beimang's imperial palace. Using hundreds of large satin pieces to piece together the picturesque mountains and rivers of two dynasties, you want to buy peace for that old woman with black and white. This technical work should be rewarded. But this reward is my Bailiang's 300,000 cavalry. It depends on whether or not your Beimang can eat it. Be careful not to burn your intestines." Chapter 1370. There's one more chapter before 12 o'clock. The four horsemen who did not stir up any trouble were like a drop of water thrown into a ravine. They could not stir up anything. After Su Fengnian and Zhang Xiuqing finished their discussion, they quickly left the restaurant. Qing Junyang only said one sentence when she saw them off. She said that the last time they parted, he gave her a sentence, and this time she returned it to him. Su Fengnian smiled and accepted it. Zhang Xiuqing returned to the window of the private room and watched the four horsemen leave on the street. He did not turn around. The woman was slowly tidying up the wine jug and wine cups on the table, as well as the exquisite plates with side dishes. Zhang Xiuqing asked curiously, Qing Junyang, what was that sentence? Can you say it? Qing Junyang smiled gracefully. Why can't I say it? Last time he told me to live well. There's no greater reason than this in the world. Zhang Xiuqing sighed. The world is going to be chaotic. Qing Junyang asked softly, who is he? If you can't say it, don't say it. Zhang Xiuqing turned around and was a little confused. I really can't say it. But I talked to him for so long. Qing Junyang, can't you guess? Qing Junyang's cheeks were slightly red. I don't know what I was thinking at that time. Anyway, I feel like I can't remember anything now. Zhang Xiuqing was stunned for a moment and held back his laughter. Just think of him as Su Lang. Anyway, his real identity will be revealed one day. When that time comes, even if you escape back to Beimang and close your ears, it will be useless. From the details of how he treated the servant girl, I can see that he is not a good person, but he can't be bad. Qing Junyang rolled her eyes at this Taoist priest who always liked to laugh at himself and only knew how to subdue demons in old books. She said softly, he is bad. Zhang Xiuqing did not know the inside story and was not willing to get involved in this matter, so as to avoid being in a difficult position. Oh right, after the Shenzhou continent sank in the eyes of scholars of the spring and autumn period, some scholar who did not accumulate virtue with his mouth said a derogatory sentence that spread far and wide. It said, Su Xiao is not a person when he looks at himself in the mirror. After Zhang Xiuqing settled down in Jizhou, he did not understand at first. Later, he found out that they were scolding the old Prince Liang for killing too many people, and that he was a malicious spirit who had intruded into the world of the living. As for others, such as, when the great general walks, one is high while the other is low, this was simple and clear. It was insinuating that Su Xiao was a cripple, and, if the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. This was once used to mock the hunchback butcher and his eldest son, Su Fengnian, for being hedonistic and unscrupulous. However, with the rise of Su Fengnian's reputation, very few people brought it up. Zhang Xiuqing sighed. It was a pity that he would not be able to take a look at the great general who had achieved great merits and had met a good end. Putting away these useless thoughts, Zhang Xiuqing looked at the sky outside the window. It was time for him to leave the city. The first master was still waiting for him. With his own news. Zhang Xiuqing suddenly returned to his seat and asked Qing Junyang to put back the cup, chopsticks, and dishes. He poured himself a cup of wine and drank slowly. She leaned against the window and quietly watched the bustling streets of the foreign city. After Su Fengnian's group of four passed through the Wild Goose Stop Pass north of Dajian City, they abandoned their horses and traveled on foot to avoid any unexpected problems. They quickly traveled north on the mountain roads where woodcutters and hunters rarely went. Both Mi Fengjie and Fan Shaochai had a whole new level of respect for the child. It was not strange for him to have such a high level of comprehension at such a young age, but it was completely inexplicable that his internal energy was so strong. Of course, they would never have guessed that the shepherd boy, Yu Long, had inherited half of Wang Xinji's legacy. During the trip to Jizhou, the sixth-year Fengzong was able to accurately find Su Fengnian and pass on the situation of the battle in Yuzhou. When the group of four was running along a high ridge along a canyon, Su Fengnian suddenly stopped again. He raised his arm to support the handsome sea eagle that was falling through the clouds. Mi Fengjie saw that the usually calm king of Beiliang was somewhat dignified this time. He stood at the edge of the cliff in a daze. Yu Long sat on the ground and took off his sturdy leather boots. He lifted them upside down and threw away the gravel that was sticking to his feet. Mi Fengjie could not help but ask, "Is the battle at the Calabash Gate not going well?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "In the first battle at Zaoma village, the losses on both sides were actually within the expectations of Chu Lushan and Yen Wenlan. However, based on the intelligence reports I've received so far, there are some accidents outside of the battlefield that we must pay attention to. Yang Yuanzhan personally led the vanguard to attack Crouching Bao City. Since ancient times, the nomads of the north have lived half their lives on horseback. Naturally, they are skilled in horseback archery. However, during the early days of the Great Feng dynasty, they still maintained an absolute advantage over the grassland forces. You might not expect this, but even at the end of the Great Feng dynasty, even if they did not rely on the sturdy city walls and elite crossbows, the Great Feng army was still able to fight to a draw against the grassland cavalry. The reversal of victory and defeat between the two sides happened in the last 200 years or so. Countless border trade with smuggled goods for huge profits, in addition to the countless raids down south in the last 200 years, allowed the northern grassland to have a considerable number of craftsmen and ironware. The scholars of the spring and autumn period, Xianxia, rushed north and brought Beimang a rich population, a profound culture of the Central Plains, and a subtle influence on the concept of war. Dongzhua's private army attaches importance to infantry, siege, and auxiliary soldiers. This is one of the obvious changes. Su Fengnian squatted down and picked up a handful of yellow dirt. Gently holding it in his hand, he said, Beimang claims to have invested 300,000 soldiers on the Eastern Front. If we were to go back 30 or 40 years, when we were in the early days of the 9 kingdoms of the Central Plains, we would definitely take it for granted that the 300,000 soldiers were, at most, 100,000 soldiers. Even if we added in the laborers who transported the provisions and the auxiliary soldiers who were responsible for the maintenance of the equipment, it would still not reach 300,000. Su Shao might not be the first person to resist this kind of bad habit of bolstering one's courage before the battle, but Su Shao was definitely the military general who resisted it the most resolutely and thoroughly. Ever since he attacked the various Liang bandit towns to set up separatist forces, he said that he had 5,000 troops and horses. Later on, he even became a huge joke. When the Northern Han battle had just begun, the Northern Han frontline general heard a spy report that Su Shao had brought 20,000 soldiers with him. The general defending the city counted on his fingers. According to the old rules, there were only 6,000 to 7,000 soldiers, at most 10,000. There was still a battle to be fought and there was no need to retreat. In the end, the Northern Han general was captured by Su Shao. Before being beheaded as a sacrifice, he cursed Su Shao as a swindler. Su Shao was so angry that he kicked out half of the general's teeth. He retorted, "If this daddy says 20,000, it means 20,000. I don't cheat the old or the young. You have the face to call such an honest person a swindler?" Originally, Yu Dilong had been swinging his 2 boots back and forth, as if he wanted to take a stroll in the boots. Hearing this, he quieted down and perked up his ears to listen to his master talk about something that was very far away from him, war. Chapter 1371. Su Fengnian clenched his fists, feeling the coolness of the yellow soil in his palms. He sighed, putting aside Beimang's central line and Liuzhou's western line. The eastern line of Yuzhou has more than 200,000 fighters. The remaining 100,000 auxiliary soldiers are actually no different from fighters. Beimang rides more and walks less. Dongzhua has set a rule that during this campaign, the fighters are not allowed to set up tents along the way. When they dismount, they sleep. When they open their eyes, they get on their horses and fight. The reason why there are 100,000 auxiliary soldiers is more to deal with the strongholds at the mouth of the gorge. When Yang Yuanzhan dealt with the Zeoma stronghold, he assigned the auxiliary soldiers to attack the strongholds. Most of the commanders of these auxiliary soldiers have fathers who were Chuanqiu survivors, or were actually Chuanqiu survivors in their 40s or 50s. As for Yang Yuanzhan's personal army and Hong Jingyan's Ruan cavalry, these main forces bypassed the strongholds and rode straight down, striving to reach Crouching Bao City as quickly as possible. By the time the main forces reach the city and the siege weapons arrive, the rear lines will have been more or less cleared. The conscripted peasants in Longyao province who are responsible for the supply of food will be able to continue their journey south. Therefore, in this battle, Beimang and Dongzhua are fighting very Central Plains. Fan Shaochai said coldly, "In that case, the strongholds north of Crouching Bao City are clearly doomed. Why didn't Yuzhou just line up Crouching Bao City, Luanhe City, and Xiaguang City at the northernmost part of the mouth of the gourd. Wouldn't that stop Beimang's army outside the pass? They wouldn't have to worry about Beimang's cavalry slowly encroaching on the strongholds. In the end, you Bailiang don't care about the lives of your soldiers just because you want to be the best in the world. Mi Fengjie looked at this woman as if she was an idiot. For the first time, a smile appeared on his withered face. Of course, this smile had nothing to do with good intentions. This was not to say that Mi Fengjie had grasped the loophole in Fan Xiaochai's words. The master of the profound sword cave's thinking was extremely simple. He was a Bailiang general who had soaked in blood on the battlefield and laid in piles of corpses. How could a veteran like Yan Wenluan, who had proven his talent in war during the Spring and Autumn War, be a fool fishing for fame? Su Fengnian did not ridicule Fan Xiaochai for being a frog at the bottom of a well, nor did he mock her for being a frog at the bottom of a well. Instead, he raised his clenched fist and pointed at the canyon by his feet. He calmly said, "The mouth of the gourd is not here. I have personally traveled beyond the Great Wall, so I can roughly imagine how big the mouth of the gourd is. Moreover, in terms of military affairs, where to build a city on a mountain, where to build a pass, where to build a fort near a river, and where to build a flintlock based on a dangerous situation, not only were there particular considerations, there were also all kinds of complicated adaptations. The mouth of the gourd is the most advantageous terrain in Bailiang, and it is also the only natural defensive strategic location. You were right when you said that you wanted the soldiers of the fort to die. Once the enemy arrived, these officers and soldiers who were defending the fort would not be able to survive. They would only be able to defend to the death." Su Fengnian clenched his fists. The wind and sand on the cliff blew against his face, messing up the hair on his temples. He said, "Bailiang only told Li Yang that the mouth of the gourd could hold 150 to 60,000 northern barbarians, but most of the people of the Central Plains were unwilling to believe it. If from the beginning, Yan Wenluan wanted the 50,000 Yuzhou soldiers in the 3 cities and 200 forts at the mouth of the gourd to all die in battle at the mouth of the gourd." Su Fengnian, whose tone had always been calm, paused for a moment and then smiled. "I'm afraid that even if the Central Plains heard about this, they would pretend not to have heard it. Perhaps they would just say, 'Oh,' and then say nothing else. One should drink wine, one should admire the snow, one should enjoy the snow, one should enjoy the pleasures of life." Fan Xiaochai bit her lip, stubbornly asking, "If one person is willing to fight to the death, 100 people are willing. Even if 1,000 people are willing, are the 50,000 soldiers of the Yuzhou border army really willing to die at the mouth of the gourd? Father and mother gave them 2 legs. Won't they flee?" Finally, Mi Fengjie could confidently teach this woman, who knew nothing but killing, a lesson. With a sneer, he said, "You are the descendant of one of the first nobles of the old northern Han. How could you possibly understand what the people of northern Liang are thinking? The great general has only been in charge of Bailiang for 20 years. The morale of the army is still there. Moreover, the Bailiang border has not been peaceful for many years. When soldiers go to war, go into battle, and kill the enemy, Bailiang is the best in the world. It is not just because of the Bailiang's horses, bows, crossbows, and cold sabers. In the end, it is because of their pride. Do you, Fan Xiaochai, understand?" Su Fengnian declined to comment. With a slight bitterness, he softly said, "Bailiang has always claimed to have 300,000 cavalry. The busybodies of Liyang have always been curious as to how much resources Su Shao has saved up for me. How many cavalry and infantry are there? How many border armies and local garrisons are there?" Yu Dilong quietly asked, "Master, how many do you have?" Su Fengnian appeared absent-minded. After turning his head, he gently smiled and said, "Guess?" Yu Dilong shook his head. Su Fengnian once again gazed at the northwestern sky. Once upon a time, there was an old man who liked to say, "Guess." In response, Su Fengnian would always roll his eyes and say, "Step on your grandpa." The old man would smile and say, "That's right, I'm your father." Su Fengnian put away these thoughts and said in a low voice, "The Yuzhou garrisons at Calabash Pass are willing to defend to the death because of the reason Mi Fengjie mentioned. However, you did not mention the more important reason. Beiliang has less than 2 million households and is limited by its small territory. No matter how much they recuperate, their population will always be less than 10 million. Then let me ask you a simple question. There are only 2 million households, but Beiliang has hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Which household doesn't have someone in the army? If the Beiliang border army is destroyed, which household doesn't need to wear mourning clothes? Su Fengyan gnashed his teeth. Almost all the young adults of Yuzhou province are in the local army of Yuzhou province. Their hometowns are right behind the garrisons of the 3 cities and 200 fortresses at the mouth of Calabash. If one of them dies, their families may live for another day. It's that simple. Su Fengyan slowly stood up and said, Yan Wenluan, who is in charge of Yuzhou's military affairs, set up an unwritten rule. When Su Xiao was still alive, countless Yuzhou officials wantonly criticized this rule. After I inherited it, all the scholars, including Huang Shang, strongly requested that this rule be abolished. Mi Fengjie did not know about this, but Fan Shaochai, who had become the spy of the Fu Shui chamber, knew very well. The Yuzhou border army has an iron law. No matter who it is, if someone retreats before the battle, their entire family will be executed. Yan Wenluan once told me that he could give up being the commander of Beiliang's infantry and could even hand over the military power at Yuzhou's border to someone else. However, before he dies in battle, no one can change this rule. Even I, Su Fengyan, cannot change it. Su Fengyan exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. He squinted his eyes and murmured softly, "This is war, this is Beiliang." The mountain wind was swift and fierce. Su Fengyan stood at the edge of the cliff. He was a little far from the 3 people, and seemed a little lonely. Fan Shaochai hesitated for a moment before asking, "What are we going to do next?" Su Fengyan smiled and said, "Whatever I can do, I'll do. I've been doing the same thing since I came to Jizhou." Mi Fengjie, who had noticed some clues before, asked carefully, "Are you trying to return to the peak of martial arts?" Su Fengyan replied, "The mountain is at the end of the river and the mountain is at the end of the river. Even if there is no road under my feet, I have to find one." Outside Dunhuang, there was a huge stone Buddha with a majestic mountain as its embryo. Day after day, year after year, the Buddha looked at the world with a smile and pity. In the main hall of Mount Wudong, there was the Zhenwu Great Emperor, who had stood with his sword for hundreds of years. In the Holy Temple, the Absolute Saint, the Quasi-Saint, and the many sages who accompanied the sacrifice still had the aura of death. He murmured softly, "Zizai, zizai, 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 there is no one, there is no self. Ask yourself where you are, and you will naturally be at ease. Tathagata Buddha, Tathagata Buddha, there is a future, there is a future. How did this life come to be?" Taoism sat in forgetfulness to comprehend immortality. Buddhism visualized to let go. Confucianism guarded benevolence and great fortitude. Su Fengyan closed his eyes and stretched out his hand, allowing the wind to blow away the handful of yellow sand in his palm. When Su Fengyan finally arrived at Transverse Water City, a middle-aged man dressed in a simple and clean Confucian robe came out of the city alone to welcome him. He said a few words and gave him a gift. When Su Fengyan urged his horse to leave, the 6th-year banknote scholar of Yonghui Academy bid him farewell. When I left Jiangnan in Yonghui Academy's 7th-year banknote, I brought with me a bag of soil from my hometown. 14 years later, the soil has long since disappeared, leaving only this old bag. I sincerely ask that after I die, when the hooves of Beiliang can one day step on the hinterland of Beimeng, please take a handful of soil from Beimeng and offer it as a sacrifice to Wei Jingteng. Chapter 1372. In the north of Jetlu Commandery in Yuzhou, after hundreds or thousands of years of erosion by flowing water, the ground was fragmented and crisscrossed with gullies of different sizes. A dark-skinned young swordsman with a short stature was standing on a flat-roofed gully with a broad view. He was using his arm to wipe the long sword that had never been sheathed since it came out of the furnace. The name of the sword was Sheathless. Beimeng had a good saber and a nameless sword, and Beimeng had no swordsman in Jianghu. These were all recognized by Beimeng Liang. Although Jianghu Liang was one of the few grandmasters of swordsmanship in the world and the calm disturbance was a famous weapon on the list of swordsmanship, Liang Jianghu still thought that Bei Mang had no swordsmanship and even said that Bei Mang would still have no swordsmanship in another 100 years. He was much more indifferent to this kind of thing than Jianghu Liang, whose name was specially changed to imply that Bei Mang's swordsmanship was the combination of green and yellow. For him, practicing his own sword was more important than anything else. Besides, practicing swordsmanship was just practicing swordsmanship. As for the title of Earth Immortal or the number one in the world, he didn't need to think too much about it. Therefore, he never wasted his energy to think about things other than swordsmanship. The sheathless sword in his hand was a new sword. It had no history or inheritance. The materials used to forge it and the craftsmanship of the swordsmith were not too bad. However, compared to those famous swords with interesting names on the list, it was definitely a far cry. There was a difference of at least 8,000 miles between them. However, the man who led him on the path of swordsmanship, who was unwilling to admit that he was his master, helped him pay for the casting of the sword before he left and said a lot of long-winded last words to him. He was like a dying man who just couldn't swallow his last breath and stayed up for a few days and nights. No matter how filial the younger generation was, he wouldn't be able to stand it. A sword is fine as long as it fits the hand. Once it fits the hand, it will be satisfactory. A swordsman who changes his sword back and forth will not be able to practice good swordsmanship. Of course, you might ask if a broken sword can't be replaced. Wrong? You don't believe me? You see, Liang Li Chungang only has a wooden horse ox. He can even open the gate of heaven with a sword. Is it wrong to learn from him? That can't be right? Although I don't practice swordsmanship, I feel that when a swordsman chooses a sword, it's like a man looking for a wife. Love at first sight is the most important thing. Hurry up and take a few more glances at the sword in your hand. I spent a few dozen taels of silver on it. You poor brat, do you dare to not fall in love at first sight? If you have the ability, try shaking your head and see if I don't break your arms and legs. If you don't even have this bit of eyesight, how can you still practice the sword? I've wasted a few dozen taels of silver. From your expression, it seems that you don't want me to leave? Are you nodding or shaking your head? Damn it, if you don't want me to leave, can't you at least bring some money with you? A few copper coins will do. Oh, so you want to ask me for a few sword manuals, but you're too embarrassed to ask? To tell you the truth, no. Brat, I'll leave you with one last sentence. Remember, don't think that just because I didn't take your money, you can ignore it. Practicing martial arts, whether it's practicing the sword or practicing the sword, these two words can break all logic. Ridiculous. You don't understand, do you? These two words are enough for you to ponder over for 10 years. Who told you to have such poor comprehension? It's worse than when I was young. Otherwise, I would have taken you in as my disciple long ago. Since your comprehension is poor, don't blame me for being stingy. If you want to blame someone, blame your parents. That's all I have to say. Since I can't find a wife in Bei Mang, then I'll find one in Liang. Let's not meet again in the future. I'm afraid that when the time comes, my heart will ache for the sword money and I'll regret helping you pay the bill today. At that time, the swordsmith beside him was so angry that his face turned ashen. Let's not talk about the little pauper, but this big pauper is really your mother. It's fine if you say that 11 taels of silver is a few dozen taels, but you want to round it up and only pay 10 taels? This kind of person, you're bragging so much in my sword shop, and you're even misleading people and teaching them ridiculous? You're the most ridiculous person in the world. Then, the bad-tempered swordsmith finally couldn't take it anymore and scolded him on the spot. It'd be strange if you could find a wife in Bei Mang. Hurry up and go to Liang to harm other girls. Then you'll be thanking the heavens and earth. The young swordsman stopped wiping his sword and looked into the distance with a slight smile on his face. If that unknown swordsmith back then knew of that guy's identity, he probably wouldn't have dared to scold him like that even if he was beaten to death. Now, after Tuoba Bodhisattva became the number one in Bei Mang, he was still thought to be no match for Wang Xianxia. No matter how much Tuoba Bodhisattva's cultivation improved over the years, he couldn't change this fact. However, The previous number 1 in Beimang before Tuoba Bodhisattva mysteriously disappeared. Everyone in Beimang believed that he could definitely fight Wang Xianji to the death. This genius who was hailed as the one in 1,000 years in the grasslands was Huyen Dagwan. He was a sect by himself. And this swordsman who couldn't become Huyen Dagwan's disciple was Tai Mu Dai. His ancestors were once the highest flying eagles in the grasslands. They even soared freely in the skies of the central plains. Tai Mu Dai wasn't someone who would reminisce about the past. He had a feeling that he most likely wouldn't be able to return to the grasslands this time. He didn't feel much about the dynasty of Beimang. Most people in the grasslands were like that. A tent was a home, and a surname was a tribe. The reason why he got involved in this mess was because the Beimang royal court used his tribe to threaten him. At that time, the 10 of them joined forces to kill that Beiliang general with the surname Yen. Tai Chi and Kokutu died first. Tibing Shan was abandoned by that little idea and died at a certain pass. Later, the 7 of them fell into a deadlock again. Ahema, who always complained about not being able to drink, died laughing. Later, they almost succeeded in escaping danger under the lead of the Great Yu House. Unfortunately, they were discovered by a group of people who were said to be Qi cultivators. 2 of the Beimang experts who had been famous for a long time died. Tai Mu Dai didn't even know their names. He only remembered that they both used sabers. One of them even helped him block a spear from the Beiliang expert. Now, only he, Tai Mu Dai, the Great Yu House teacher, the princess who always covered half of her face, and the gloomy old woman who had lost the flowers on her temples. This should have been a great situation of a group of people ganging up on one person. Why did they lose so badly? The Great Yu House teacher said many things while escaping, but Tai Mu Dai forgot all about it. He only knew that they tried countless methods. At first, they scattered in all directions. Later, they tried their best to surround and attack. Later, they tried all kinds of ambushes and interceptions. In the end, it was all useless. From beginning to end, the Beiliang man, who was so strong that even Tai Mu Dai felt fear, used one method to hunt them down. Whoever stood in the northernmost position, he would target and kill them. He didn't seem to be in a hurry at all. He only used one spear. Before that, his opponent could use all their strength. If someone stood in the northernmost position, he wouldn't hesitate to change his target. Generally speaking, martial arts masters who had reached the level of these 10 people had extremely strong stamina and legs. If they were determined to escape, it wouldn't be easy for them to kill an enemy of the same level, even if they were more skilled. They would need to fight for a long time. But the problem was that the guy who only used an ordinary spear only needed one spear to kill. This was more fatal than anything else. Before he used his spear, he would rely on his strong body to wear them down. He would either dodge or meet force with force when he couldn't dodge in time. It was precisely because he had personally experienced how terrifying this person was that Tai Mu Dai understood why he often heard people say that there were only 2 kinds of experts in the world. One was Wang Xianji, and the other was all the martial artists led by Tuoba Bodhisattva. Tai Mu Dai grinned. That man who said he was going to Liyang to find a wife. In the current world, he, Tuoba Bodhisattva, and the king of Beiliang could be considered one kind of martial artists. Everyone else, including Tai Mu Dai, was another kind. A middle-aged man whose clothes were stained with blood squatted by the young swordsman's feet. He grabbed a handful of soil and put it in his mouth. He slowly chewed and smiled. What happy things are you thinking about? Out of us 4 stray dogs, only you can smile, and it's so easy. Tai Mu Dai smiled. I'm thinking about a man. The scholarly man who was eating soil joked. Tai Mu Dai, your words have a deep meaning. I really didn't see it before. Tai Mu Dai chuckled. The man who had fallen into disrepair also seemed to be in a leisurely mood. He said sarcastically, in spring, the earth's energy flows, and the earth awakens. The yellow cotton soil in my mouth belongs to the children of the earth. They're still young. The one I tasted a few days ago is already old. Although he wasn't interested, Tai Mu Dai still listened attentively. The man looked around and smiled warmly. he whispered mysteriously, since you're standing here, then you have a chance to live. It'll be difficult for the three of us. An old woman with a hunched back said eccentrically, Great music house, you're not in a bad mood either. You can even chat with Tai Mu Dai, here. That little idea of ours is risking his life to buy us some precious time to breathe. It was the chess and sword music school's Mr. First. The man laughed. An inch of time is worth an inch of gold. Time is something that's always valuable. Of course, it's even more valuable now. The heads of the four of us added together should barely be worth 10,000 cavalrymen. Roughly speaking, 10,000 cavalry with 10 years of life on the battlefield, that's... He suddenly stood up and said with a serious expression, It's here. Tai Mu Dai, tightened his grip on his scabbard and said in a deep voice, My sword will definitely be faster than the previous pass. The old woman sneered. So what if you have the elegance of a sword immortal? As long as we can't kill Su Yanbing, we'll have to pay with our lives again today. Great Music House patted the young swordsman's shoulder. Your sword is getting faster and faster. Even if it's just a hair's breadth faster, it's still a good thing. Tai Mu Dai, you must trust yourself and your sword. The young man nodded. His tanned face was dazzling under the sun. Chapter 1373. This lightened Happy House's mood. He looked at the old woman, who was the oldest and most afraid of death, and said indifferently, I'll stay behind this time. Not only did the old woman not appreciate his kindness, but she also said sarcastically, It's your chess and sword music school's turn. Happy House smiled and dismissed it. About half a mile away, two silhouettes crossed each other and, slowly, walked towards Tai Mu Dai's huge boat. The old woman narrowed her eyes and looked over, her face as calm as water. Happy House didn't look at the fight. He shook his sleeves and sat cross-legged. The woman in the white dress was like a white butterfly dancing gracefully on the yellow sand slope, ethereal and agile. This little thought, nicknamed half-face makeup, was fighting in close quarters with the guy surnamed Su. With a tap of her foot, she spun around and grabbed Su Yanbing's head with her 5 fingers like hooks. Su Yanbing's body leaned back, and the slender jade-like hand brushed past a few inches above his face. The end of the iron spear in his hand casually hooked and slammed into Little Thought's neck. Even the 8 of them, including Banmian Zhuang, had experienced this kind of casual spear attack countless times. Because it did not contain a lot of qi, even if they were hit, they would not be seriously injured. However, at Phoenix Rising Pass, Wuxia was angered because of this. After being hit 8 times, the ruthless Peak Master Ti Bing was so angry that his lungs were about to explode from anger. He no longer prepared to escape at any time and instead used the most powerful punch he had ever used in his life. He did not hold back and looked death in the face. In the end, Su Yanbing seized the opportunity and pierced through Wuxia's fist, arm, and shoulder. Little Thought tilted her body and quickly rushed forward, dodging the iron spear. If someone were to watch the fight from the side, it would look like she was carrying the spear on her shoulder. Little Thought instantly arrived in front of Su Yanbing, who had just stood up. Her 4 fingers formed a sharp knife and ruthlessly stabbed towards Su Yanbing's heart. Su Yanbing's wrist shook slightly, and the shaft of the spear lightly knocked against her shoulder, pushing her away. The white-clothed woman's feet slid on the yellow sand, leaving behind a trail of blood at the corner of her mouth. Su Yanbing held the iron spear in his hand, his face expressionless. He did not pay any attention to Little Thought, whose eyes were as sharp as knives. Instead, he looked at the big turtle that was separated by 2 deep trenches. After acting for so long, it was time for him to take the stage. Sure enough, Little Thought leaped and fell into the ravine. Before Little Thought jumped off the cliff, he sat on the ground like a private teacher who was about to teach a lesson. He smiled gently and said, Heaven and earth have no words, the wind sings. There was a lot of sand in the desert, but if there were only strong winds blowing in the sky without a single speck of yellow sand, it would be illogical. On the plateau where Su Yanbing was standing, he could only hear the whistling of the wind, but there was no sand at all. Lu Fu sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to concentrate. In an instant, blood flowed out from his 7 orifices, but his face remained serene. He said in a clear voice, "War in the south of the city, death in the north of the country. For my sake I call the crow, and for the guest hero." At the end of his speech, a figure rose slowly. Another Lufu stood up, like thousands of rays of light converging to form a shape. He took a step forward, directly passing through his sitting self. His sleeves fluttered, and his steps became bigger and bigger. He approached the edge of the big turtle and turned into a long rainbow, rushing towards Su Yanbing. The sitting Mr. First's face was covered in blood, and the green robe on his knees dripped with blood. He said in a hoarse voice, "Life is short, plants and trees are short, and all will return to the earth in peace." Another Lufu stood up, but his figure was not as elegant as the previous one. He staggered, but his speed was extremely fast. He also rushed towards Su Yanbing. Sword immortals flew on their swords, traveling north in the morning and crossing the horizon in the evening. However, the immortals' astral travel was even faster. The two Lufu's astral travel came one after another. The former stopped behind Su Yanbing, while the latter came in front of Su Yanbing. At some point in time, Tai Mu Dai was standing in front of the dead master of the great music house. He roared, "Defong!" The Lufu's corpse, Tai Mu Dai, one Lufu's soul, and Su Yanbing, the other Lufu's soul. The five of them happened to be in a straight line. The old woman in the spiderweb cocoon did not see how Tai Mu Dai attacked, nor did she see when he left the Big Turtle Valley and headed toward the Big Turtle Valley. When she could finally take a closer look, she realized that the situation she saw was so bizarre that she could not believe her eyes. The Lufu's cultivator sacrificed his life to guide Tai Mu Dai, to use the Earth Immortal's killing move. It ended with Su Yanbing's spear piercing Tai Mu Dai's shoulder 4 feet in front of him. The tip of the sheathless sword was still a foot away from Su Yanbing's heart. Although the sword chi had arrived and caused a pool of blood to appear on Su Yanbing's chest, it was definitely not enough to kill him. In a battle of life and death between top martial arts grandmasters, a foot of distance was like the difference between yin and yang. However, between Su Yanbing and Tai Mu Dai, there was someone holding the spear. This prevented Su Yanbing from casually pulling the spear downwards and crushing Tai Mu Dai's heart and lungs. Su Yanbing pulled out the spear. The body of the spear let out a series of ear-piercing screeches. The uninvited guest supported Tai Mu Dai with one hand and flicked his wrist with the other. There were traces of blood on his palm. The old woman swallowed. Chapter 1374. As a senior on the level of Spiderweb's ancestor, she recognized this person. Huyan Dagwan. Other than Toba Bodhisattva, there was no one else who could make Su Yanbing's spear return at full power. Of course, it was even more unrealistic for the latter to return empty-handed. Huyan Dagwan laughed. "You finally made it in time. Su Yanbing, if you don't kill Tai Mu Dai, I won't make trouble for Su Fengyan. How about it?" Su Yanbing's expression was cold. He raised his spear an inch and took a step back. The opponent in front of him was worthy of him pulling away to the most suitable position for his spear to unleash its full power. Huyan Dagwan said helplessly, "To tell the truth, Liang Mang's fight has nothing to do with me. I've never thought of making things difficult for Su Fengyan." Tai Mu Dai struggled for a moment, but Huyan Dagwan's hand on his shoulder slightly increased in strength. The former immediately found it difficult to breathe. Huyan Dagwan straightened his expression and said, "But if you insist on killing Tai Mu Dai today, then I don't mind killing Su Fengyan. As for whether or not it succeeds, I don't care." The old woman knew that Huyan Dagwan wasn't purposely releasing his chi, but she still felt suffocated. Then, she immediately felt a surge of grief and indignation that she couldn't suppress no matter how hard she tried. This was because the person who had chased them for an entire 10 days without saying a single word had finally spoken. Su Yanbing said calmly, "You'll have to ask my spear first." Huyan Dagwan, who was even more fluent in the official language of Liyang than the people of Liyang, cursed. He laughed bitterly and said, Stop, I'm scared of you. Su Yanbing, since you're determined to fight, fine. The spear in your hand can't take a single blow. Go back and get a new spear. For better or worse, it can take 3 spears from you. Otherwise, we won't be able to fight to our heart's content. I, Huyen Dagwan, will wait for you here. Oh, that whatever, and that old woman who likes to stick a red flower in her mouth, I'll help you keep them here. When the time comes, whoever wins will speak. How about it? Su Yanbing nodded, turned around and left just like that. This scene caused the old woman's eyes to almost pop out of their sockets. When Su Yanbing's figure disappeared from sight, Huyen Dagwan released his grip. Tai Madua, whose face was covered in tears, turned to look at the large banner where Mr. Yu sat. The scabbard slipped out of his hand. Huyen Dagwan calmly said, "Pick it up." Tai Mudu seemed to be out of his wits and did not hear what Huyen Dagwan was saying. Huyen Dagwan was too lazy to waste any more words. He slapped Tai Mu several zhang away from the Great Joy House's corpse. Then he kicked the abandoned sword over. Little thought, half of her face covered by a white veil, came to Huyen Dagwan with a complicated expression. Huyen Dagwan sighed. 800 years ago, was it important who we were? It was not strange that Luo Yang could not let go. She was Qin Empress's. She had even let go of this so-called Emperor Qin's shadow. So what were you? You were just a woman of the imperial family whose country was destroyed by the great Qin army. This kind of grudge has caused so many conflicts in the various dynasties and dynasties of the Central Plains over the past 800 years, let alone some princess of a small country. It's meaningless. Huyen Dagwan looked up at the sky. Besides, that person is gone. Su Fengyan is just Su Fengyan. Who do you hate? Back then, you successfully instigated those two women to become enemies. To a large extent, it was you who caused the great Qin to be destroyed. Are you still not satisfied? Little thought tore off the veil. Half of her face was extraordinarily beautiful, but the other half of her face was constantly changing between the faces of unfamiliar women. Finally it stopped. It was actually half a man's face. Huyen Dagwan turned his head and did not meet her gaze. He said softly, "You can go." She looked at the white veil floating in the distance and raised a hand to cover that half of her face. She murmured, "You really left? Then tell me, where can I go? You are always like this, not even willing to look at me. I never hated you. I just want you to look at me, just one look." Huyen Dagwan asked, "You really don't want to go?" Little thought of Princess Grave raised her other hand. Her 10 fingers were like hooks as she slowly cut her 2 faces into a bloody mess. She did not show any pain and closed her eyes. She used a tone that modern people could not understand and softly hummed a song. When the song ended, Huyen Dagwan pushed her forehead with his palm. She fell into the canyon. Huyen Dagwan stood alone with his hands behind his back. He sighed softly, "It's finally over in this life." That white dress was like a delicate white butterfly that was unwilling to break out of its cocoon. It hid in the cocoon timidly and looked at the outside world. There was no woman in the world who took off her veil when she was alone. Year after year, life after life, she looked at him in the mirror. In the corridor under the eaves of a private school in Bailiang, an old man was lying on a rattan chair, basking in the warm sunlight. Young children sat around him. Every time the old man sang a line, the children would sing a line with him. It was an ancient song that spread not long after the great Qin was destroyed. The song was melodious. A daughter of the Yang family has just grown up and no one knows her. Born beautiful, she can't give up on herself. She chose the king's side. Looking back with a smile, the beauties of the 6 palaces pale in comparison. Chapter 1375. The furthest distance between 2 beacon towers was no more than 30 li, and the closest distance was less than 3 li. Xianxia was extremely strict and meticulous in choosing the location of each beacon tower. Standing on the watchtower of any beacon tower, one would definitely see more than 2 neighboring beacons. Bien Feng exchanged glances with each other. Among the many beacons that stretched into the distance, the deer tail beacons located in a desert corridor was only an unremarkable one. According to the rules, there was 1 beacon commander, 2 vice commanders, and 4 sons of beacons. After the northern Mang came knocking, the deer tail beacons were supplemented with 5 sons of beacons and a post horse. Deer tail beacons was set up on the left side of the gourd. It belonged to the group of strongholds with the bell and drum stronghold as the core. Compared to the date horse stronghold, it was closer to the left and to the rear. As the Beimang vanguard drove straight down, although the bell and drum stronghold had not been attacked by a large number of Mang cavalry, the beacons of deer-tail beacons could already clearly feel that the battle was approaching. Those armored Beimang cavalry roamed nearby to scout the terrain. Yesterday, there were even more daring than 10 Beimang scouts who suddenly charged toward deer-tail beacons. The distance between the two sides was less than 80 paces. The dozen or so Beimang soldiers with excellent eyesight could even clearly see the faces of the northern barbarians. The beacon commander Sima Zhenming drew his bow and shot down the leading Beimang scout with a single arrow. The leader of the Beimang scouts was clearly shocked. After collecting the corpse, he resentfully left. Before he left, he even raised his saber and pointed at deer-tail beacons. At dawn this morning, Sima Zhenming, who was personally responsible for guarding the rear half of the night, stood on the high platform and looked up at the cage called Do Ling. As the head of deer-tail beacons, he was different from most of the illiterate beacons in the bell and drum stronghold. Sima Zhenming was a somewhat famous scholar near the bell and drum stronghold. His writing was very beautiful. At the same time, Sima Zhenming also had excellent archery skills. Therefore, he was promoted to beacon commander in less than half a year after joining the army. The Sima family was a prestigious family in Bailiang. Although Sima Zhenming was a concubine's son, he could have relied on his status as a general family to become a government official in a nearby county. It wouldn't have taken him more than a few years to become an official. The reason why he came to Calabash Pass was because of Sima Zhenming's impulsiveness. Everyone knew that His Royal Highness had 800 bodyguards called the White Horse Righteous Followers. They were all riding Liangbei horses from Xinli Ranch. They were armed with swords, crossbows, and white armor. If it was a few years ago, the White Horse Righteous Followers were of little value in the eyes of first-class families. Only third-rate general families in Bailiang would be willing to put their children in the White Horse Righteous Followers. However, after Su Fengnian's successful hereditary succession, the White Horse Righteous Followers became the White Horse Righteous Followers. Unfortunately, Sima Zhenming was not selected. Instead, a close friend of his from a prestigious family in the same county was selected. Last autumn, that guy went to Liangzhou full of ambition. It was said that a few noble ladies in the county who had their eyes on the top of their heads almost recommended themselves to that guy. While Sima Zhenming was happy for his best friend, he inevitably felt that he had lost face. In a fit of anger, he ran to Calabash Pass, which was almost the northernmost borderline. At first, those deer-tailed old soldiers didn't like to talk to him, and the previous Feng Shui didn't like this weak scholar with a handsome face. He even threatened him to clean his butt at night. At that time, Sima Zhenming was furious and had a fierce fight with that old soldier. After that, he thought that he had beaten up his superior and would definitely be sent back with his tail between his legs. He didn't expect that the Feng Shui, who looked like a bear, to be so strong-willed. Although he didn't give Sima Zhenming a good face afterwards, he didn't do anything to deliberately make things difficult for this troublesome Feng Shui who didn't know the rules. He only made Sima Zhenming cook for 2 months. Sima Zhenming didn't pay attention to the fact that a gentleman should stay away from the kitchen and just accepted it. At the end of last year, when the Feng Shui of each fort went to the Bell and Drum village to practice martial arts, Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui had forced Sima Zhenming to do something beyond his ability. Unexpectedly, Sima Zhenming received a personal commendation from the Deputy General of Yuzhou Province. Until now, Sima Zhenming still remembered that on the way back to Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui with the Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui with the Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui. At the beginning of this spring, the scouts of Bailiang and Beimang almost exchanged lives with each other every day. At this moment, the Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui suddenly promoted to the head of Rise Castle. Sima Zhenming heard from Old Sui that the Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui was comrades in many forts of Date Horse Village and Chicken Cry Village. They had been friends for over 20 years. When they were young, they were all brave men who had killed Beimang barbarians in Beimang. The two Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui came to the high platform on time. Hearing the footsteps, Sima Zhenming turned around and looked at the two different faces. One was immature and vigorous. After all, he was only 16 or 17 years old. The other was weathered and mediocre. The former was one of the feng shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui. In the words of the old feng shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui, he was a new recruit from Yuzhou province. Even his fart was fragrant. The latter was an old senior of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui. His surname was Shui, and it was said that he was one of the earliest feng shui soldiers. After Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui was built, he became the first batch of feng shui. After many years of hard work, he finally became the deputy commander. However, the younger generation of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui liked to call him Xiao Shui. Even the previous commander said that he did not know where this nickname came from. Old man Shui had a good temper and did not mind. Whenever he smiled, he would smile. The other deputy commander of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui, Guixi, was in the prime of his life. He was the only one who called the old man Master Shui. He was also a strange person who did not smile much. There were many round logs in Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui. Guixi would practice a set of boxing moves on the logs every day for an hour. When he was on night watch, he would practice boxing moves on the edge of the high platform. Sima Zhenming had learned martial arts from a famous boxing master in Yuzhou since he was young. He had a rough understanding of Guixi's skills. Perhaps his style was not good, but his foundation was solid. Therefore, after he became the commander of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui, Sima Zhenming had always treated Guixi with respect and treated him as an elder brother. Sima Zhenming smiled at the young man, Feng Zi, and said, "Spring sleep is hard to come by. Go sleep for a while. I'll keep watch for you." The young man shook his head and smiled brightly. "No need. Third brother Xiao and the others are snoring like thunder. Commander Feng, you should go rest. With me and little Shui on duty, nothing will go wrong." The old man smiled amiably. Sima Zhenming had clearly experienced the thunderous snoring of those men. He smiled and said, "Then I'll keep watch for a while. I'm not sleepy anyways." Sima Zhenming had a sentence that he did not say out loud. Perhaps he would have to sleep in the future. The young man, Feng Zi, stood at the edge of the high platform like a long spear, looking into the distance. The short deputy commander, Old Man Shui, walked to Sima Zhenming's side. He reached out and pinched Feng Zi's old and shriveled collar, not saying a word. Sima Zhenming lowered his voice and sighed, "Deputy Commander Shui, from the looks of it, our Deer Tail peace fire won't last long. Although Beimang's vanguard might not put this place in their eyes, even if they rush to set up camp below Sleeping Bao City, as long as they are still eyeing Wanhe and Xiaoguang cities behind Sleeping Bao City, Zhongming village will definitely be a thorn in their side. Now, let's see who will lead the troops to attack." The old man with turbid eyes nodded. He rubbed his hands and said softly, "Commander Sima Feng, I'll tell you the truth. Don't be angry. Our Deer Tail soldiers are actually very open-minded. You're different from us. You don't have to wait for death here. We can use our family's connections to transfer you back to Yuzhou, which is safer. Commander Feng, are you really not afraid of death, or have you gone crazy thinking about military merits?" Sima Zhenming didn't get angry. He smiled bitterly and said, "Of course I've thought about this before, but a letter from my family told me not to even think about it. Although my Sima family is a large family in Yuzhou, not to mention the previous generation, there are 4 Sima descendants in my generation who hold positions in the Yuzhou army. Including me, there are 3 who are at the mouth of the gourd. I joined the army the latest, so I can't be the commander Feng. My eldest grandson's eldest brother is already a military inspector in Xiaoguang City who is only a step away from becoming a military officer. My family originally wanted to do everything we could to help him find a good excuse to retreat to Yuzhou, but who would have thought that my eldest brother was stubborn and refused to leave? The family could only settle for the next best thing, which was to move my 4th brother, who has a slightly lower position, back to Yuzhou. However, those generals in the Yuzhou border army aren't blind. My Sima family isn't an existence that can see the heavens. Once the 4th brother from the eldest branch leaves, then I, the 3rd brother, naturally have to stay. My father's letter was vague, but that's the general's meaning. I think this is also good. At least I have a younger brother who is 10 years old from the same mother. With him by my mother's side, I'll be able to support myself in 4 or 5 years. Once I shamelessly return to Yuzhou, my father, mother, and younger brother won't be able to raise their heads for the rest of their lives. Sima Zhenming's originally bitter smile began to become somewhat free and easy. After glancing at the young Master Feng, he looked at the old man and said, "I don't dare to ask the young Master Feng, nor do I have the heart to ask. However, I'm very curious about what Deputy Commander Xue and Guoxishui are thinking. Before I arrived at the mouth of the gourd, I heard that you old veterans are the best at fighting. Let's not talk about military merits for now. Let's talk about preserving our lives first." Chapter 1376. The old man reached out his hand to support himself on the cold orange stalk. His old face was wrinkled like a withered tree, and it was unknown how many sorrows and joys he had accumulated. The old deputy commander said calmly, "Marshal Sima Feng, to tell you the truth, this old man has never been on the battlefield in my entire life. I've never experienced a battle before. I've only seen it a few times from afar many years ago. Ever since I arrived at Huluku 17 years ago, I never thought that I would see the Beimeng army while I was still alive. People died in battle. This old man has lived for so long. I'm someone who can't wake up at any time. It's not that I'm afraid, but I don't dare to think about the tragedies that happened after the war. Many years ago, before I arrived in Bailiang, I saw 2-legged sheep being sold by the side of the road. They were sold by the caddy, with butchers and pots of boiling water on the side. Dog meat was 500 coins per caddy, and this sheep meat was only 100 coins per caddy. Sima Zhenming's face was full of confusion. He didn't know what to say about selling sheep meat and eating sheep meat. The old man's fingers trembled slightly. He said softly, "Those 2-legged sheep are people with only 2 legs. Women are called lambs to be eaten, and weak children are called small bones to be eaten. Some rare scholars, as long as they aren't too thin and sallow, can be sold for a higher price. They are called scented sheep to be eaten." Sima Zhenming almost vomited, but at the same time his scalp went numb. This beacon marshal narrowed his eyes, staring fixedly at this old deputy marshal from Shirlu Commandery in Yuzhou, one hand on the cold blade's hilt. At this time, the deputy commander Guoxi, who had just finished practicing, came over. He glanced at Sima Zhenming and silently walked to the old man's side. Old man Xue said indifferently, "At this time, in front of the Beimeng army, is it important whether you're a Bailiang native or a spring and autumn refugee from the Central Plains? Don't worry, this old man isn't a Beimeng spy. I can't afford to lose the face of the Xue ancestors." Sima Zhenming sneered and asked, "Is it really not important?" The old man suddenly laughed happily and pointed at the silent deputy commander Guoxi. "Commander, your archery skills are on par with his, but in terms of fighting, you're far behind." Then this old man, who used to be able to make fun of anyone in feng shui, no longer paid any attention to Sima Zhenming. His face revealed a deep expression of reminiscence as he said to himself, "Back then, I was in the Shishu Lengyamen secretariat. I only did some shady business like copying scriptures and engraving official seals. My annual salary was not even 100 stones. I was only a minor 7th-rank official. Of course, I didn't have a single hair on my head. Then, I had a way to earn money to support my family. In the palace, during festivals, there were many spring couplets to be put up. It was our turn to take the stage. Before writing the couplets, the eunuchs would bring in cinnabar and gold powder for mixing ink. At this time, I took out a large brush and dipped it into the gold powder. Oh, the brush broke. I stuffed it back into my sleeve and replaced it with another brush. It broke again. After I left the palace, I carefully shook off the gold powder. There's at least 2 tails. Find a bank and melt it down. That's a small gold ingot." The old man, who had completely forgotten himself, laughed. "Back then, when I bought books and collected them, I relied on these small gold ingots." Sima Zhenming was dumbfounded. He didn't know how to deal with this Shishu survivor who had been hiding in Bailiang for many years. Did he really have to draw his sword? Guoxi said calmly, "Marshal Sima Feng, after the war, if you, me, and Lord Xue can survive, you can report the truth. In the second year of Yonghui Guishi was the assassin who shot 6 consecutive arrows at the Grand General outside Liangzhou Pass. But if Shui and I both die and you are still alive, I hope you won't bring this up again. I Wuxia have lost all thoughts of revenge since the 6th year of Yonghui. Of course, it's up to you to believe it or not. Suddenly, the young man who was on guard shouted in a panic, "Koji! More than 120 cavalry!" Without hesitation, Sima Zhenming said, "Prepare for battle." Although the vanguard army had flattened the Xiaoma stronghold in one breath and killed more than 3,000 enemies, from the commander-in-chief Yang Yuanzhan to the several generals, all the officers did not relax in the slightest. 4,000 men had died in battle, so how many were wounded? Fortunately, it wasn't the hot summer season when diseases were most easily spread. Otherwise, with the ruthless style of the nomads in the north, they would have killed all the severely injured on the spot. However, within the vanguard, there was a group of people who were extremely relaxed and comfortable. These people mostly had elite cavalry and retainers protecting them, ranging from 20 to 30 to a few hundred. They were all young, between 15 to 25 years old. If it was said that Sima Zhenming regretted that he had missed out on the position of White Horse Commander, then these sons of powerful officials of the Southern Dynasty, or the people of the grasslands who knew their descendants well, were also quite angry that they had not been selected as the grand strategist. Of Northern Mang's 3 battle lines, the most important central line was the Southern Courtyard's great King Dongjue, who held great authority and personally presided over military affairs. Apart from the Dong family's private army, the rest of the troops were mainly elites from the various border towns. Moreover, they were right under Fatty Dong's nose, so it was very difficult for outsiders to interfere. On the West Courtyard, there was Lu Gui and the North Courtyard King Toba Bodhisattva. In addition, the 8,000 Chang cavalry had been completely wiped out before the battle. Only a fool would go there and suffer. Therefore, the East Courtyard Yuzhou had a large number of descendants of great nobles who didn't want to take the risk and wanted to earn military merits. General Yang Yuanzhan, who had always had a good relationship with various forces, was not unreasonable. He acquiesced to the actions of the various families and allowed them to leave the army and take the initiative to search for the Xiaoma stronghold. If they had the courage and strength to fight to the death with the stronghold, Yang Yuanzhan wouldn't stop them. During this period of time, groups of cavalry of varying numbers were constantly rushing in and out of the camp. There were even many small groups of cavalry that had been left outside the mouth of the calabash who had rushed over after hearing the news and joined the hunting game. It was like a bloody feast that was slowly unfolding. It was said that the second young master of the Xie family from Dragon Waste province returned with 80 cavalrymen at dusk yesterday with 16 bloody heads of the Yuzhou beacons hanging on both sides of the horses' backs. There were also 2 war horses that deliberately dragged the corpses of 2 beacon commanders into the camp. The 2 corpses were dragged all the way across the yellow sand, their flesh and blood badly mangled. One could even see the white bones on their backs. In the latter half of the night, another group of grassland Rong soldiers returned. It was a group of over 400 cavalrymen gathered from 3 tribes. They directly broke through a Wu castle in a valley at the edge of Crouching Bao City. These blood-soaked Rong soldiers waved their sabers as they entered the camp. The sabers that were clearly different from the Rong scimitars were all the famous Bailiang sabers of the Su family. A few young leaders of the Rong soldiers even threw down a few crumpled things as they rode into the camp. When someone picked them up, they realized that they were actually the Su flags. The Battle of the Xiaoma stronghold had shaken the morale of the vanguard army, but their morale had been greatly shaken. At dawn this morning, another 7 or 8 groups of cavalry rushed out of the camp. With the arrival of a large number of siege weapons, the attack on Crouching Bao City was imminent. A tall man with a full beard whose age couldn't be determined was casually walking in the military camp. Beside him was a maidservant who was countless times more eye-catching than him. The young woman had an exquisitely embroidered brocade pouch hanging from her waist. Unfortunately, that bit of fragrance had long been covered up by the stinky smell of the military camp, leaving not even the slightest bit of it remaining. When these 2 people walked past, the Beimang soldiers sleeping on their horses all looked at them as if they wanted to eat them alive. In the early years of Northern Mang, there had never been a rule of bringing women into battle. Wasn't it all because those officials of the Southern dynasty had led them astray? As long as one's family background was sufficient, even the military supervisors who came from the royal court could only turn a blind eye to it. Of Northern Mang's 10 first-rank A surnames, there were 7 in Northern Mang and only 3 in Southern Mang. However, when it came to the number of B surnames, the influential families of the Southern dynasty held a slight advantage. On the eastern front of Yuzhou right now, there were plenty of descendants of the dragon-waisted clans. They weren't people that these soldiers who couldn't even afford to live in tents could afford to offend. The man who was accompanied by a woman walked and stopped along the way. From time to time, he would look up at the towering, crouching Bao City. Finally, when he passed by a large pile of tents, he was spotted by a sharp-eyed young master wearing a mink coat. The latter hurriedly ran up to the man and whispered with a flattering expression, "Big Brother Zhong, what a coincidence." The man stroked his beard and glanced at the scene behind the young master. He smiled and said, "It looks like you've been hung by the horse's head all night. What? You can't hold it in anymore and want to go and get some firecrackers?" The young man chuckled and said, "I've made an agreement with a few brothers. We're going to get some firecrackers to warm up our hands before the siege. We're going to work together to take down a big stronghold before the siege. When we go back, our elders at home will be proud of us, lest they say that we're useless." The man whose surname was a little strange compared to the Southern Court's big clans nodded and didn't comment. He looked past the head of the 3rd generation of Gusai province and saw 4 or 5 young men wearing brocade clothes and mink coats standing together. Obviously, they didn't recognize him. Their arrogant eyes were a little unfriendly. The man glanced at the horses behind them. They were all war horses that were ranked high on the grassland. Most importantly, good horses were easy to train. Beimang had the custom of hanging the horse's head. Once the horse was hung well, not only would the warhorse's pace be the same when charging, but even the height of the horse's head would be the same. There wouldn't be a scene of uneven horses. When they were running, they would look like a row of eagles soaring on the ground. In Beimang, not only must a man be skilled in riding and archery, but the skill of hanging the horse was also very important. It was probably like the zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting of the scholars of the Central Plains. The man withdrew his gaze and smiled at the young man from the 2nd generation of Gusai province. "Be careful. There will be a lot of big battles in the next few years." Chapter 1377. The young master, who was a descendant of a wealthy family in Gusai province, was flattered and nodded vigorously. Then he said mysteriously, "There's a guy with the surname Pang. His father is the new general of Wazhu Army Town in Gusai province. This kid is very valued in his family. I'm his best friend, so I told him that his father secretly sent him a master as a personal guard. A 2nd-level grandmaster. So, I'm going to play with him today. Although there are only a little more than 100 cavalrymen, with that master, we can take down any beacon. I estimate that he can kill half of a smaller fort in Yuzhou by himself. However, that kid said that his father doesn't want him to be in the limelight, so I can't force him to do anything. Moreover, that master is arrogant. He looks at me askance. Damn it. Big Brother Zhong, you go ahead. I'll go out with them." The man smiled and said, "Go ahead." The young master turned around and ran 2 steps. Then, he turned back and asked cautiously, "Big Brother Zhong, can I drink with you tonight? I've stolen some good wine this time." The man nodded and said, "Sure. As long as it's not my turn to attack the fort, it's not a problem." The young master smiled so widely that his mouth almost reached behind his ears. He trotted away. The 400 or so riders led by the 5 children of aristocratic families roared as they galloped away. When the children of aristocratic families smiled at the man on horseback, the man smiled faintly and waved his hand. After the 400 cavalrymen left the camp, they didn't immediately split up. They chose the fort group where the bell and drum fort was located. They were going in the same general direction. However, when they got closer, they split up and rushed forward, each looking for a target to attack. Along the way, they saw many beacons and forts that had been casually uprooted by the main force. The ground was in a mess. The corpses of the Yuzhou soldiers were all beheaded. After all, these heads were all heavy military exploits. After reaching their destination, the cavalrymen finally split up. The other three didn't find it strange that the two best friends didn't split up. Instead, they were full of sarcasm in their hearts. Two descendants of a dignified second-class family only had 120 cavalrymen. 120 riders, that was really a pitiful sight. The cavalrymen began to go deeper and deeper. They didn't dare to get too close to the beacons attached to the forts. In fact, they had already asked someone about the details of this hunting expedition yesterday. After knowing the truth, they restrained themselves. It turned out that although those cavalry troops had obtained real military merits, they had suffered heavy casualties, especially the Rong soldiers who had taken down Fort Wu and obtained the Sioux flag. The reason why they looked like they had returned victorious was because they did not retrieve the corpses of their comrades and left them on the battlefield. Furthermore, according to various sources, although those sparrow-sized beacons were small, the archers were often very troublesome to deal with. Even if they managed to break in, they would still have to engage in close combat to the end, and would not rest until they were dead. What a joke! Northern Mang and Northern Liang had been fighting fierce battles for so many years. Who had ever heard of anyone accepting surrender? It was rumored that the former king of the South Courtyard, Huang Songpu, had made a suggestion in the court after his return to the throne, to see if he could recruit people to surrender. At that time, not to mention the generals who were holding the edict as if they had smelled shit, even the emperor's face had turned green on the spot. In the end, it was still the imperial decree of peace who helped Huang Songpu out of this predicament, saying that the matter of surrendering wasn't urgent, that they could talk about it after Bailiang was defeated. The imperial decree of peace even joked, saying, as long as our army crosses Bailiang's path, even if Sir Huang doesn't want to surrender no matter what, my great Mang generals and the blade craftsmen in the rear will protest together. Stop killing, there aren't enough blades. The 120 cavalrymen finally found excellent prey. Young Master Pang, whose father was tile-building army's town general, raised his arm, producing a sheepskin map from his bosom. That South Dynasty third-generation ancestor who was trying to worm his way into being close to this man bent over to take a look, saying with shock, "Pang Rui, you really are something. You even have this kind of thing. It seems like on our Eastern Front, only 1,000-men commander has the qualifications to carry something good like this, right?" The corners of the youngster named Pang Rui's lips curled up. He put away the map, looking towards the small deer tail beacon on the map, nodding and saying, every 1,000-men commander has a copy, a total of 16 sheepskin parchments. This is something I borrowed from one of them last night. He only found it after searching for half a day, directly giving it to me with a wave of his hand. They don't need it, nor do they care about it, but for us, it is quite useful. Seng Pingshan, let's make things clear first. We will take down as many beacon towers as we can, but in the end, we will have to split the heads of Yozhou's soldiers, so an equal split definitely won't work. I will take 70, you take 30. Seng Pingshan, whose grandfather was the assistant minister of revenue of South Dynasty's West capital, shouted strangely, "Bullshit, is there anyone who doesn't uphold justice like you? You and I each have 60 riders, and I won't hide behind you. No matter what, we should split it 50-50. Pang Rui tilted his head and raised his chin slightly, secretly pointing at the old rider, who was resting with his eyes closed beside him. Seng Pingshan's imposing manner immediately deflated, and he said softly, "Pang Rui, my brother Pang, sigh, we have been friends for many years. How about you take 60 and I take 40? Pang Rui narrowed his eyes and said slyly, 60-40, it's not impossible, but you have to tell me who that bearded man with a woman beside him is. Seng Pingshan looked like he was in a dilemma. Pang Rui curled his lips. If you don't hurry up, I will give the order to attack the beacon towers. Seng Pingshan threw down his whip and snorted heavily. He leaned closer and whispered, Zhong family. Pang Rui's expression instantly turned serious. He muttered to himself, Zhong family, there is no other family in Beimang like them. Great General Zhong Shuntong, Great Demon Zhong Liang. Among the younger generation of the Zhong family, Zhong Ge was originally quite famous, but after he married the Lu family of the Zhong family, there was suddenly no news of him. There was news that he was killed. But he has an even more powerful elder brother called Zhong Tan, right? Why, that sloppy man is one of the vanguard generals of the Eastern Front, Zhong Tan. Seng Pingshan nodded, his face full of admiration and fascination. Zhong Tan was a famous person in Beimang who could compete with the second son of the martial god, Tuoba Chunsun. Not to mention Seng Pingshan, who had no achievements, even his grandfather would have to obediently greet Zhong Tan with a smile. Pang Rui cracked his neck, raised his hand high, and waved it forward. More than 100 riders suddenly clamped their bellies and began to charge. At the Deer Tail Beacon, Sima Zhenming gave orders to his 11 subordinates in an orderly manner. He, Deputy Commander Guishi, and 2 of the stronger sons of Beimang went to the observation tower. 5 of the remaining 7 were to guard the entrance and try to shoot 2 to 3 rounds of arrows to stop the enemy. After that, they didn't need to care about anything else and just tightly shut the door. Once someone broke through the door, they were to draw their swords and fight to the death. The other 2 were to wait for an opportunity to shoot down the Beimang cavalry. Sima Zhenming told them that what they needed to do was very simple. They just needed to wait for the enemy to come closer before killing them. They only needed to kill them at close range and not from a long distance. 1 less round of arrows was fine. After giving the order, Sima Zhenming, who was about to climb the tower, glanced at Old Man Shui. The latter didn't say anything and only nodded. Arriving at the tall platform, Sima Zhenming gestured downwards with his hand, having the 2 men with bows and quivers on their backs squat down first. After all, Sima Zhenming still didn't know if there were any northern Mang master archers in that cavalry troop. Moreover, he and Deputy Commander Guishi were proficient in martial arts. Even if they were unfortunate enough to encounter them, they would be able to dodge and not be caught off guard and killed on the spot. The 120 cavalry formed a neat charging line and began to madly charge. Sima Zhenming sized up the heads of the warhorses and calmly said, "These aren't ordinary cavalry." Guishi's face was expressionless. He had already taken out an arrow from his quiver and nodded. 500 steps. Sima Zhenming glanced at Guishi's iron bow and asked, 200 steps? Guishi calmly said, "No need for consecutive arrows. 200 steps will pierce through armor. 150 steps, 3 consecutive arrows. Within 100 steps, 4 arrows can be loaded on the bow. If you don't want to continuously draw the bow, the furthest you can go is 250 steps. Heavy armor will be broken." Sima Zhenming coldly snorted, "Beimang isn't a fort. It's only equipped with light crossbows and not large crossbows. Otherwise, you would be able to experience the power of my large crossbow." 400 steps. Guishi's expression was strange as he quickly glanced at this commander of Beimang. "It's not like I haven't experienced the range of an arqueballista in the past. I've seen even more powerful giant crossbows." Guishi didn't say that the arqueballista wasn't strong. Sima Zhenming was panicking. 300 steps. Guishi took a deep breath and suddenly raised his bow to gather power. This Shishu remnant had an almost imperceptible smile on his face. 200 steps. Almost at the same time, from the Deer Tail Ba Feng Sui's cavalry and the watchtower, a loud noise sounded. A tall soldier of the Beimang cavalry shot an arrow. Guishi's arrow just happened to be the same target as that soldier. Guishi's head suddenly tilted to the side. An arrow grazed his cheek, leaving behind a deep groove of blood. This deputy commander's ears were ringing, and that Beimang master archer had his head pierced by an arrow and fell off his horse. The distance between the 2 sides was reduced by another 50 steps from the rapid galloping of horse hooves. Guishi shot 3 consecutive arrows. 2 of the 3 riders at the front had their chests pierced by an arrow. The warhorses continued to charge forward, but their corpses flew off the backs of the horses and fell heavily on the yellow sand. One of the riders quickly leaned back, his entire body leaning against the back of the warhorse. Only then was he able to dodge the arrow. Sima Zhenming also shot a quick arrow, but it was deflected by the soldier who hadn't drawn his bow from start to finish. However, although the arrow was deflected, the scimitar in the hands of the Beimang young master was knocked out of his hands. Guishi opened his mouth and said, "Kill the easy ones first." Sima Zhenming, who had moved his feet to dodge the 3 arrows, lightly grunted. Chapter 1378. 150 Steps. Almost all of the Beimang cavalry had fired a volley of arrows, and their accuracy wasn't bad either. Even though Sima Zhenming had changed his position, he still had to deflect several arrows. Apart from the arrow shot by that master archer, Guishi didn't move at all. He used his bow to casually deflect the incoming arrows. Many of the arrows pierced into the orange cage behind Sima Zhenming, their tails trembling violently. There were even a few arrows that directly pierced through the cage with great momentum. After piercing through the cage, they continued to fly upwards. The two felt as if they were in a rain of arrows. 100 steps. Guishi pulled out 4 arrows from his quiver. The 2 crouching bearers also suddenly stood up. After finding the crosshairs, they pulled back their bows even more. A muffled groan of pain came from below the beacons. Clearly, someone had been shot. Guishi's contributions were still outstanding. His arrows pierced through the armor of 2 people and killed them. The other 2 were injured, but their combat strength was still great. However, this was enough to make them feel fear. On the watchtower, one of the bearers successfully shot a Beimang soldier in the neck. It was as if a flower of blood had bloomed. His face full of joy, he was just about to turn around and report the good news to his fellow soldiers when he was immediately dragged to the ground by the commander. As his body fell to the ground, this bearer saw that not far away, Xiao Yuan's brother had also fallen. Only his face had been pierced by 2 arrows. There was even an arrow in his shoulder. Sima Zhenming roared, "You don't want to live anymore? Did you forget what I said? Once you shoot an arrow, you'll be a coward for this, daddy." That bearer gritted his teeth and used his arm to wipe away his tears, nodding heavily. Less than 50 steps. This meant that this would be the last volley of arrows from the deer-tail beacons. Sima Zhenming, who had bent over like a cat, shot down another soldier. As for Guishi, who was being targeted by more than 20 soldiers, he was shot the moment he appeared. When he had no choice but to withdraw his bow, an arrow still managed to slice off a chunk of flesh from his shoulder. As for the archer, Feng Zi, who had just escaped death, he was shot by 6 or 7 arrows as soon as he got up. The force was so great that his body was knocked back several inches from the ground. When he fell to the ground, Master Feng lay in a pool of blood. One of his trembling hands reached out. But when he breathed his last, he was still unable to touch the brand new cold blade at his waist that he had just replaced last year. "It's time to get a new wife." That was the cheers of Deertail Beacon's men when they received their new sabers. Sima Zhenming's eyes were moist. After putting down his bow, he squatted down and helped that Feng Zi cover his eyes. He turned his head and asked, "Do you dare to have another match?" Guishi, who had already pulled out his cold knife, nodded. 120 enemy cavalrymen, and they were elite cavalrymen at that. What followed next was the breaking of the door, the second battle within the beacon. Actually, Sima Zhenming knew better than anyone that the Deer-tail beacon was doomed to fail. It all depended on how many Beimang barbarians they could kill. Sima Zhenming ordered Guishi in a low voice, "I'll go downstairs and guard the door. Deputy Commander Gua, you stay here and find a chance to shoot." As Sima Zhenming turned to leave, he said to Guishi with his back to him, "Even if everyone dies, including me, Deer-tail Beacon has already broken even. I thank you on behalf of the dead Bailiang brothers." Guishi was silent, his 5 fingers tightly gripping the iron bow. As Sima Zhenming was about to walk down the stairs, Guishi calmly said, "My real name is Guizhen, but now I'm Deer-tail Beacon, Deputy Commander Guishi." Sima Zhenming didn't stop. He only raised his hand and clenched it into a fist. Guishi used his hand to wipe his face, and then he produced an arrow from his quiver. With one standing up and one squatting down, he killed a northern Mang soldier who was about to dismount from his horse outside the fire beacon without deliberately aiming at all. The arrow pierced through the horse's back. It nailed him to the horse's back. When he reached the ground floor, Sima Zhenming looked around. Of the 5 people downstairs, 2 had died, but the one on the stairs was already dead. On the other hand, the enemy cavalry had 11 dead and 6 injured. Without waiting for Sima Zhenming to speak, the door was knocked open and they swarmed in. Sima Zhenming walked out with large steps, bringing his blade down on the head of a tall and large northern Mang barbarian, drawing out a bone-deep scarlet wound on that person's face and chest. Blood splattered all over Sima Zhenming's body. In the blink of an eye, he stabbed a second barbarian in the chest with both hands and roared, "Deputy Commander Shui, take all our brothers upstairs and help Guishi guard the stairs." Sima Zhenming charged forward with the collision saber style, knocking 3 barbarians in a straight line out the door in one go. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Old Man Shui ran towards the stairs with the 3 barbarians. However, one of the barbarians who had barged into the beacon threw out his saber with all his might, the entire blade stabbing into the barbarian's thigh. The barbarian tumbled down the stairs. He had a young face. He was the youth who had been on guard duty earlier and had seen the enemy cavalry attack. His face was pale as snow as he leaned against the stairs, his eyes filled with fear. However, at that moment, the youth, who usually spoke in a soft voice when speaking to his seniors, used the loudest voice he had ever used in his life to shout at the 2 barbarians at the top of the stairs, "Don't worry about me." The youth raised his crossbow and shot an arrow at the barbarians charging at him. A sturdy barbarian lowered his head in disbelief and saw the crossbow arrow sticking out of his chest with only the end of the arrow sticking out. The youth was hacked to death by a flurry of sabers. Meanwhile, Sima Zhenming, who had charged out of the door, killed another 2 young Beimang barbarians. However, an old barbarian swept forward in a daze and grabbed him by the neck. Sima Zhenming's entire back was smashed into the wall of the beacon. Sima Zhenming, who was bleeding from his 7 orifices, slowly raised the Baoyang saber in his hand, which was still dripping with blood. The old man sneered and twisted his wrist, breaking the neck of the Yuzhou barbarian before throwing him to the left. The corpse was casually hung on a stone tablet by the Beimang's hidden second-rank grandmaster. Chapter 1379. According to Baoyang's example, a stone tablet in front of the beacon was engraved with the names of the 5 soldiers and their equipment. Sima Zhenming, the newly appointed commander of the Deer Tail Beacon. His corpse's blood covered the stone tablet. As for the previous commander, the one who wanted him to clean his ass the first time they met, he was called Hu Lin. He was the one who had died before Tang Yanchao, the deputy captain of Fengqi Castle. Before Hu Lin resigned from the commander and was promoted to captain, he had once secretly sought out Sima Zhenming. In the end, he stood in front of him for a long time, scratching his head. He probably couldn't bring himself to apologize. Indeed, having these old ruffians say such things was worse than being stabbed. In the end, the 2 of them laughed it off. In the end, they were both dead. On the watchtower, the old Beimang grandmaster killed 2 more beacons who had drawn their swords. In the meantime, he used his hand to catch an arrow from the number 1 divine archer. The old man twirled the arrow in his hand. Looking at the 2 remaining ants, his smile was full of disdain. The short old man surnamed Shui said calmly, "You're the only heir of the Guo family. You can still leave. I'll help you block them." Guishi threw away the large iron bow and slowly drew the cold, shiny blade at his waist. "Uncle Shui, the Guo family is gone." Old Shui, who hadn't taken action in this battle, was silent. The Shui family had more than 40 people. After Chu Lushan's 1,000 cavalry entered Shu, apart from him, who was known for his cynicism in Western Shu's imperial court, all of them had died. Those who died in battle, those who committed suicide, those who were killed. There were also the women and children who had been poisoned to death by the men of the family. How could he not hate the Su family and Baoyang? But so many years had passed. Old Shui didn't know when, but he realized that many of his memories were slowly blurring. There was Western Shu's path to heaven, a boundless sea of bamboo, and the world's number 1 famous mountain. The old man liked being called Little Shui by those young Baoyang people. He liked the snow that Western Shu had never encountered before. He liked standing on high ground, closing his eyes and smelling it. His nose was filled with the smell of wind and sand. The old man asked softly, "Have you really thought it through?" Guishi nodded. Suddenly, he grinned and said, "Uncle Shui, I didn't dare to tell you before, but this Baoyang knife is so damn handy." The old man glared at him and pretended to be angry as he scolded, "Stinky brat." 500 to 600 paces away from the bucktail horse feng shui, there was a sudden feeling that two riders were motionless. The bearded man squinted at the two figures fighting on the watchtower. My intuition is accurate. Both sides would have experts. It was just that no one knew where they were hiding and when they would surface. In this kind of hunting game, it depends on who is the mouse, who is the cat, and who is the tiger. Zhong Tan's personal maid, Lu Daoxiang, was an expert from the princess tomb. She asked with a frown, an expert from the tide-listening pavilion on Mount Qingliang? But why would it appear in the little fire beacon? Zhong Tan rubbed his chin. Who knows? Zhong Tan squeezed the horse's belly. Let's go. Let's do a favor to those two young masters from the Yi family. They are probably half dead from anger this time. By the time we get there, the two Master Realm Masters we met on the narrow path will have died together. When they got close to the bucktail horse feng shui, Zhong Tan and the girl jumped off the horse and landed on the watchtower. The situation was a little different from what Zhong Tan had expected, but it wasn't a big deal. That Baoyang expert hiding in the fire beacon not only killed the Master Realm retainer that the big young master's family worshipped like a bodhisattva, but he was also heavily injured. However, together with another relatively young fire beacon, they killed 20 Baimang people. Baimang, Baoyang. The ground was filled with corpses. Zhong Tan could only lightly kick and send a Baoyang fire beacon's corpse flying. Seng Pingshan hugged his head and curled up in a corner, his body trembling. Pang Rui was crazily slashing at a corpse with his blade. A Grandmaster and a rank 3 expert. I will be beaten to death by my family when I get back. I will chop you all to pieces. She, who was pretending to be Zhong Tan's maid, frowned. Zhong Tan coughed and waited until Tsing Pingshan, who had finally returned to life, raised his head. Zhong Tan nodded at him and then said to Pang Rui indifferently, "All right, it's just an expert. I'll give you one later. I guarantee that he'll be much stronger than the one lying on the ground. As for how to explain it to your father, who is now a general in the town, I will help you." Pang Rui's face was stunned. Then, it was as if he had narrowly escaped death. Zhong Tan walked over and helped Tsing Pingshan, whose legs were weak, up. He said with a pleasant expression, "Call young Master Pang tonight. I will treat you all to wine and help you all calm down." Tsing Pingshan's face was covered in tears and snot. He clutched the general's sleeve tightly and nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. Zhong Tan shook off Tsing Pingshan's hand without leaving a trace. He came to the battlement and saw the corpse hanging on the beacon flintstone tablet. This important person in the entire Baimang dynasty just stared at it for a long time. The woman asked, "What's wrong?" Zhong Tan's gaze didn't move at all. He said softly, "A few unknown experts popping up is nothing. But what is truly terrifying is where." Zhong Tan stretched out her finger and pointed at the stone tablet. The woman was puzzled. Zhong Tan smiled and stretched. "No matter what, let's take down Crouching Bao, Luanhe, and Xiaguang cities first. Otherwise, our general will ask my uncle to bring me back personally." The group of people went downstairs. Under the dumbfounded gaze, Zhong Tan suddenly walked to the stone tablet and gently carried the corpse down. She let the corpse of the bucktail Ba Fengzi, whose name they didn't know, sit against the stone tablet. That Fengzi seemed to be looking towards the south. Zhong Tan left in large strides. After getting on the horse, he turned back and looked deeply towards the north. She said softly, "You won't die." Zhong Tan was expressionless. He muttered to himself, "But the 40,000 people at the gourd mouth of Yuzhou all know that they will die." What they were afraid of was if one day, Yuzhou, Liangzhou, Liuzhou, Lingzhou, everyone in Baoyang would think so. Chapter 1380. Because it's almost 8,000 words, it's a bit late. There's still one more chapter before dawn. Outside of Crouching Bao City, there were no more peace fires lit. Baimang's vanguard arrived at the city gates. Strong winds, yellow sand, and barren land blew the dry yellow sand into the air, hitting the flapping flags. Outside of the city, in front of Baimang's formation, there were constantly elite cavalry passing down orders. On top of Crouching Bao City, large ballistae were ready to fire. All the generals on top of the city walls subconsciously tightened their grip on their blades. A loud and shrill horn suddenly sounded. If it was in the past when Beimeng attacked a city south of the river, they would usually order the civilians and surrendered soldiers to charge forward. Not only would they fill up the trenches, they would also use up a large amount of arrows from the defending side. At most, they would use the auxiliary troops to push the cart forward, and the cavalry would swarm out. Once they arrived at the city walls, they would fire tens of thousands of arrows at the same time. As long as the defending side's morale was shaken, the Beimeng soldiers would be able to crush them in one battle. However, today, when the army arrived at Crouching Bao City, under the command of Northern Mang's great commander Yang Yuanzhan, they displayed a completely different siege style compared to the past 200 years of northern barbarians invading and raiding. At the same time the two flanks of 3,000 cavalry began to charge forward, there was a type of military heavy weapon that rarely appeared in the northwestern border fortress that appeared on a large scale. Catapult carts. Yang Yuanzhan had set up no less than 600 catapults in one night. The largest catapults required 200 people with outstanding strength, and each rock weighed 100 pounds. Not only did the 600 catapults bring a considerable amount of rocks with them when they went down south, they also swept up all the rocks north of Crouching Bao City. At this time, all of the northern Mang soldiers who were biding their time couldn't help but raise their heads, quietly waiting for that spectacular scene. Countless giant boulders would be flung high into the sky, and then smashed into hidden Bao City's walls, or landed on Ring City's military path. The 600 catapults seemed to be facing Crouching Bao City, but from the top of the city walls, one would know that they were arranged in an arc. The stronger ones would be placed in the center of the arc furthest away from the city, while the weaker ones would be placed on the left and right, and so on. No one knew who was the first to shout, but the Beimeng soldiers near the catapults shouted the same words in unison. When the first 50 kilograms of flint, wrapped in oilcloth, was ignited, it flew high into the air and was thrown towards Crouching Bao City. It was as if a fire spirit of the heavenly court had descended to the mortal realm. Following this flint, hundreds of huge rocks smashed towards the first city at the mouth of the gorge in Yuzhou province. All the Beimeng generals and soldiers were shocked by this strange siege method. Boulders fell on top of the city wall, inside the city, or were blocked by the city wall and rolled into the moat. Both inside and outside the city were filled with the sounds of wind and thunder. It was as if everyone could feel the earth trembling, as if Crouching Bao City was silently sobbing. Meanwhile, the 6,000 Mang cavalry that moved ahead before the rocks were tossed but slower than the rocks smashing into the city naturally weren't going to directly attack the city. Using cavalry to attack a city, unless there was no other choice, even the most powerful of commanders wouldn't be able to bear this type of pain. The purpose of these cavalry troops was only to escort the infantry 200 steps outside the city, to help their own side suppress the archers on the city walls. After the cavalry troops on the two wings that had opened up some distance with the infantry, after firing a rain of arrows at the top of the city walls, they no longer continued forward, instead quickly moving diagonally outwards to make room for the cavalry troops behind them. That was why the two cavalry troops were like a flood meeting a reef, but they didn't risk their lives to collide with it, instead scattering to the left and right on their own. When one of the robust cavalry commanders turned around, he gave the city wall a look. On top of the city wall, as one of Yang Yuanzhan's personal commanders, he knew about the existence of the 600 catapult carts. Moreover, he knew about the power of the catapult carts even earlier than normal commanders. Originally, in his opinion, there was no need for the two cavalry troops to protect Crouching Bao City. Under the concentrated bombardment of several hundred boulders, Crouching Bao City's defenders would be scared to the point where they couldn't even raise their heads, allowing the infantry outside the city to push all the way out of the moat. However, during the charge, casualties continuously appeared in front of and behind him. The ballistae on the city walls fired out waves after waves of arrows, among which, two cavalry troops were actually directly penetrated by a giant ballista bolt. The two cavalry corpses were nailed to the ground just like that by the ballista bolts. If one were to say that Bailiang had long heard of the sharpness of the ballista bolts, then the fact that Crouching Bao City's arrows were still raining down in an orderly manner while the boulders were exploding made this commander feel very conflicted. He had personally seen two Yuzhou soldiers being smashed by boulders, Yet the nearby archers on the city walls still shot out arrows that were above standard. The commander curled his lips. Were these Yuzhou people really not afraid of death? There was a pile of rotten meat right next to their feet. Under the cover of the boulders and the two flanks of Beimang, the ballista bolts from crouching Bao City were increasingly concentrated on the attacking infantry of the Beimang army. More and more infantry were pierced through by the ballista bolts, and there were even some unlucky ones who were shot in the chest by a single bolt. The inertia of the bolts caused them to slide back a dozen or so steps, causing the foot soldiers and shield soldiers behind them to fall to the ground. Even more of them were shot to death by the ballista bolts on the city walls. This was especially true when the infantry's battle line became uneven. The soldiers and auxiliary soldiers who were the most courageous and daring to charge at the very front were targeted by the master archers on the city walls. The ballista bolts weren't weak, but they were like a drop in the bucket in the face of the dense swarm of locusts. There was still no end to them. Like a swarm of black locusts, the slightly crowded foot soldiers did not care about the corpses and the wounded at their feet and continued to charge forward. A burly armored archer on the city walls drew his bow to the fullest. Just as he was about to shoot at a Beimang barbarian leader who was loudly giving orders to fill the trenches, an arrow pierced through his throat. His corpse was randomly dragged to the side, and the archer behind him quickly took his place. Continuously drawing the bow, especially to the fullest, would damage the arm the most. In the Yuzhou army, there were strict military orders regarding the distance between the enemy and the angle of drawing the bow, and when to use the crossbow was deeply ingrained in everyone's hearts. Crossbows followed by crossbows were the unshakable laws of Bailiang. Among them, crossbows first were ballistas, waist crossbows, and pedal crossbows. As one of the three cities at the mouth of the gourd in Yuzhou, Sleeping Bao City didn't have as many ballistas as Liangbei's Hutu City. However, it wasn't that great General Yan Wenwan didn't have enough ballistas. It was just that the size of Sleeping Bao City limited the number of ballistas. However, in the previous exchange of fire, the Beimang army still suffered heavy casualties. At a glance, there were more than 100 enemy soldiers killed by the ballista bolts. Two of the Beimang generals who were holding the line were even shot to death by the ballista bolts due to carelessness. Presumably, these two Kiliarchs who were already extremely far away from the city walls would die with everlasting regret. After all, their craftsmen from the southern dynasty always said that their ballista bolts didn't lose to Bailiang in terms of range and strength. However, when they actually arrived on the battlefield, they discovered that this wasn't the case at all. Under the cover of the rain of arrows from the cavalry on the two wings, and even before the Beimang had fired their own ballistas, Sleeping Bao City's ballistas and waist crossbows had already been fired from the top of the city walls. If it weren't for the giant rocks from the catapults suppressing the rain of arrows from the top of the city walls to a certain extent, the soldiers of the Central Army would probably have died near the moat. Dismounting and sieging a city was something Northern Mang's warriors were the worst at to begin with. If they were fighting with their lives on horseback against Northern Liang's cavalry, then even if they were at a disadvantage, they still wouldn't feel any fear. However, without a horse to ride on, this really was a vexing matter. Fortunately, the soldiers in charge of attacking the city this time were all soldiers from the various border towns of the Southern Dynasty. They had always been a level lower in the Beimang army, so their lives, such as the elite cavalry on the two wings, weren't of much concern. A bearded Beimang general waved his hand, and the 600 catapults began to move forward, preparing for the second volley of rocks. They didn't want to destroy the city walls, but rather, they wanted to cut off the reinforcements on Sleeping Bao City as much as possible. Commander Yang Yuanzhan was determined to take down Sleeping Bao City, which had less than 6,000 soldiers. Moreover, the old general's request was to take down the city in one day. There was no lack of dissent in the commander's tent regarding this decision. Some said that the terrain outside Sleeping Bao City wasn't conducive to attacking the city. The infantry formation was too long and narrow, so it didn't make much of a difference whether they sent in 10,000 or 8,000. It was better to send them in batches and give Sleeping Bao City a constant pressure. Even if they couldn't take down the city in a day, they would be able to take it in 2 days at most, reducing the number of casualties. It was the son of the Zhong family, Zhong Tan, who was advancing with the catapults. In front of them were many self-made ballistas from the southern dynasty, as well as many scaling ladders and battering logs. There were also many siege towers that had yet to be manned by archers. Zhong Tan raised his hand to cover his forehead. Finally, Sleeping Bao City had no choice but to use light crossbows. Zhong Tan heard the constant stream of reports from the roaming cavalry. All he could hear was cold numbers, how many had died, and how many had been injured. In just an hour, more than 100 cavalry and more than 1,000 infantry had died, and this was before they had even scaled the city walls. They were all dead. All of them had died outside the moats. The furthest they had died was at the foot of Sleeping Bao City's walls. However, Zhong Tan, who could be considered one of the top sons of generals in Beimeng, was surprised even by himself. He didn't feel too much emotion. Instead, he began to think of many interesting things, such as when he heard his father, Great General Zhong Shuntong, talk about the early spring and autumn war. During the chaotic war between the 9 kingdoms, it was said that Liang had mobilized 60,000 cavalry to attack a majestic city of Dongyue to the south. After 3 days of fierce fighting, they returned without any success. Afterwards, the entire country of Dongyue celebrated, worshipping the general who had defended the country with only 10,000 men as a god. The Dongyue emperor even issued an imperial edict to bestow upon him the title of Grand Tutor. Many years later, the people of Dongyue finally realized that the soul-stirring defeat and victory of 70,000 men had only lost less than 600 men after 3 days of fighting. Chapter 1381. Zhong Tan sighed softly and gazed at the Yuzhou city in the distance. It could be said that it was the old master of Crouching Bao City who had stripped off the clothes and faces of the 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn step by step. He had turned the warm and affectionate war into a bloody tragedy from beginning to end. The number of deaths in battle grew higher and higher, from thousands to tens of thousands, then tens of thousands, until the Battle of West Rampart where people died every day and soldiers poured in every day. If it was said that Su Shao had taught the 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn what cavalry warfare was, then could it be said that after Su Zhao's death, he would teach Beimeng what it meant to defend a city in the Central Plains? Zhong Tan narrowed his eyes. His infantry had finally begun to scale the city walls. The city walls of Crouching Bao City were like moths and ants. On top of the city walls, rolling stones, smashing logs, and scalding oil rained down. Ladders after ladders were toppled by long hooks. One by one, Beimeng soldiers who were scaling the city walls were shot down by a rain of arrows. After they fell, the unfortunate ones who hadn't died yet were trampled to death by the rest of the siege army. The Yuzhou archers and light crossbowmen who were blocking the Beimeng soldiers from scaling the city walls were also shot down by the archers on the siege towers that were almost as tall as the city walls. They fell back one after another. In this kind of concentrated shooting, those who were skilled in martial arts and those who weren't were all going to die. The few master archers on top of the city walls who still had strength in their arms were targeted by the archers in the siege towers. They were all shot down like hedgehogs full of arrows. Beimeng's siege methods were unscrupulous. When the battle was at a stalemate, they took advantage of every opening and aimed the ballistae at the empty spots on the city walls. They shot out stepping arrows that were no different from large javelins and nailed them into the back of the city walls in a row, helping the Beimeng soldiers scale the city walls. As for the Beimeng soldiers who climbed up like agile monkeys, they were all brave soldiers that Zhong Tan had carefully selected. As Zhong Tan listened to the frontline military intelligence from the messenger cavalry, he unhurriedly passed down orders one after another to bring them back to the frontline. Although this was a deadly siege with a huge price to pay, the siege method wasn't rigid and inflexible. Just like when the defenders changed their guard, Zhong Tan would also order the Chiliarch who had lost soldiers to cross the line, to withdraw. As for the exact number of the line, in Zhong Tan's mind, he temporarily set it at 100 casualties at the beginning of the siege. Once the 20 Chiliarchs and their 20,000 soldiers had experienced the first wave of siege, the second wave would increase the number to 150. If they didn't cross the line, even if they were surnamed Yelu or Murong, they would still have to brace themselves and continue. If they crossed the line, no matter how much they wanted to fight to the death, they would have to obediently withdraw. Zhong Tan didn't care how those Kiliarchs and Centurions didn't understand. In fact, he didn't need them to understand at all. After all, he had already asked the Commander-in-Chief Yang Yuanzhan for the right to execute the generals in the front line. Whoever didn't agree with him could use their heads to disobey the military order. Zhong Tan subconsciously reached out his hand to stroke the soft mane on the back of his warhorse. This kind of command method of haggling over every detail as one's own arm was taught to the world by that white-robed general. However, most of the generals who imitated him only scratched the surface but not the essence. Firstly, they couldn't be as familiar with the fighting strength and tenacity of each commandant of the famous academies as that white-robed general. Secondly, the battlefield was constantly changing. If they deliberately pursued perfection in details, it was easy to pick up sesame seeds and throw away watermelons. What's more, the commander-in-chief would be as tired as a dog before the victory was decided. Not to mention the commander-in-chief himself, even the bannermen and messengers would have broken their arms and legs. Zhong Tan believed that he had learned more than scratched the surface, but he hadn't grasped the essence. However, Zhong Tan wasn't in a hurry. He still had to fight Luanhe and Shiguang City at the mouth of Yuzhou Province. Furthermore, these two cities were bigger and had more guards. Zhong Tan's sitting posture was as steady as a rock. Occasionally, he would ask his maidservant Lu Daoxiang for a jug of water to moisten his throat. Otherwise, his throat would have long been smoking. The 20 Kiliarchs of the Middle Corps had all seen the scenery of the city wall at close range. Among them, 2 of them had almost succeeded in standing on the city wall. One of them was stabbed by 7 or 8 iron spears and smashed into a pile of corpses. After getting up, he saw 7 or 8 arrows inserted into the corpses not far from his feet. If he were to smash into these corpses, even if he didn't get pierced through, he definitely wouldn't be able to attack Luanhe City. Another one had just stood on the city wall and had even used his saber to chop off several spearheads. Just as he was about to step in, he was shot in the ribs by a stray arrow at a tricky angle. As he staggered and fell, he was viciously hooked by a flying hook called an iron hook. When the soldiers of Yuzhou Province pulled him up, the Chiliarch whose back had hit the city wall hurriedly raised his arm and chopped randomly. Only then did he manage to chop off the iron chain. After landing on the ground in a sorry state, he took advantage of the momentum and rolled. 5 or 6 arrows whizzed down from his back. Obviously, his dazzling armor had provoked the public's anger. This caused him to feel some lingering fear when he led his troops back to the rear. He had almost become the first Yuzhou Chiliarch to die in battle. No wonder those irksome strategists before the battle had reminded them that they could wear layers of heavy armor, but under no circumstances should they wear anything too flashy and eye-catching. Those winch mounts on Crouching Bao City had mostly been destroyed, and those powerful wolf-tooth bats had been completely destroyed. The Beimang soldiers who had died to these bats were the most miserable of all. There wasn't a single piece of unscathed flesh on their bodies. They looked like pork that had been carefully shaved by a plane. Their corpses were too horrible to look at. Around noon, an especially majestic bugle horn resounded across the battlefield. The onslaught on the battlefield, which had never stopped, immediately surged. Commander Yang Yuanzhan rode his horse to Zhong Tan's side, accompanied by a group of cavalry officers and 5 or 6 strategists dressed in embroidered robes. They found that Zhong Tan was surrounded by many young civil officials sitting in front of several tables. Their brushes flew like they were flying, constantly recording the details of the battle. Yang Yuanzhan didn't greet Zhong Tan politely. Instead, he walked to the side of a young official who had been named Fast Scribe by the order of peace. He bent down and picked up a piece of paper whose ink hadn't dried yet. His handwriting was a bit messy. After Crouching Bao City's wooden bats, there are several types of clay and brick bats. Their power is slightly weaker. They destroyed 3 of our army's battering rams with a hardwood iron head. They are more than a chi long and shaped like wolf teeth. They are hidden behind the high walls of the city gates and fall down like thunder. According to reports, the age of the arrows used by Crouching Bao City varies. They have been forged for 7 or 8 years and were made in the 14th year of Yonghui. Yang Yuanzhan sneered, "What a good arrow that has been sharp for a long time. If this general has the chance, I will personally pass on these words to those Xijing officials in the Ministry of War. Let them open their eyes wide and take a good look." The fast scribe who had been implicated hurriedly stopped what he was doing. His face was full of fear and trepidation. He was afraid that one of the 13 great generals of Beimeng would vent his anger on him, a small fry who hadn't even reached the official rank yet. The general gently put the paper back and smiled. "It's not your fault. You all did well. After we take down Crouching Bao City, I will personally record this merit for you." Even a great general who was ranked among the top 40 in Beimeng had dismounted from his horse. Zhong Tan didn't have the thick skin to continue sitting on the horse's back. Although Yang Yuanzhan wasn't as highly regarded by the empress as Lu Gui, they were both generals of the southern dynasty. Compared to Zhong Tan's father, Zhong Shuntong, Yang Yuanzhan was much more trustworthy than Zhong Shuntong, not to mention his ability to mobilize troops. Furthermore, Zhong Tan was making a living under the old man's nose. Yang Yuanzhan and Zhong Tan walked side by side to the general's side. Zhong Tan said softly, "Previously in the Xijing imperial court, I heard a certain preceptor say something. At that time, my blood was boiling. Now that I think about it, I'm not so sure anymore." Yang Yuanzhan, who had just rushed over from the wounded camp, was a little unhappy. He frowned and asked, "What was it?" Zhong Tan smiled. "Beiliang is known to have the most guts in Liang. Let's break their guts and break their guts." Yang Yuanzhan asked, "What's wrong?" Chapter 1382. Zhong Tan pointed at Crouching Bao City with his horsewhip. Of course, this city can't become Xiangfan City, which sat on the fishing platform of the Central Plains for more than a decade. But even if Lanhe and Xiaoguang can't become Xiangfan City, what about Yuzhou? Is our Beimeng really not going to accept a single soldier? Even if Xiangfan City doesn't appear in Yuzhou, what about Liangzhou, which has the most stable defensive line? Are we really going to wipe out Beiliang's 2 million households before we stop? Yang Yuanzhan laughed coldly. Haven't you noticed what kind of people are in charge of the stronghold to the north of Crouching Bao City? How old are the commanders and deputies of Crouching Bao City? After pondering for a bit, Zhong Tan was somewhat enlightened. He said with a smile, "They are all old soldiers who went to northern Mang's Heshi province in their early years. Crouching Bao City's Zhu Mu and Gao Shiqing are even almost 60 years old." From this, it seems that from the mouth of the Calabash to Crouching Bao City, although the number of soldiers is small, the troops stationed here are all people who truly dare to die. It's no wonder that Crouching Bao City's 1,000-odd valiant refugees from Liuzhou were all brought back to the south of Lanhe City. Yang Yuanzhan sighed emotionally. Yan Wenwan's move is to retreat in order to advance. Those refugees from Liuzhou all held a skeptical and wait-and-see attitude at the start. Once they're the first to die at the Calabash defensive line in Yuzhou, we won't even need Beimeng to summon them to surrender. They'll start a rebellion on their own and even implicate all the refugees who left Liuzhou, as well as the situation in Liuzhou. However, they'll first die at Crouching Bao City and Lanhe City, and when the time comes, they'll retreat again and again until they reach Xiaoguang City. Put yourself in their shoes. What would you think if you were a refugee? Would you dare to fight? The answer is obvious. So many Yuzhou soldiers have died before it's their turn to walk onto the battlefield. Since they've come all the way to Yuzhou, why should they fear death? Zhong Tan, this is precisely where Yan Wenwan uses her troops. Zhong Tan grunted in acknowledgement. Zhong Tan suddenly laughed and said, "The Chang and Rong tribes were especially valiant in their attacks on the city. It was unexpected." Yang Yuanzhan said calmly, "The order of peace announced that after Beiliang is pacified, the people of Beimeng, who were originally divided into 4 classes, will have a 5th class, Liangren. Then the Chang tribes, who are currently at the bottom of the hierarchy, will finally be 1 class higher." Although Zhong Tan knew about this, he still had a look of disbelief on his face. He asked, "Is this really possible? Is this enough to make people face death with equanimity?" Yang Yuanzhan said in a soft voice, "The Central Plains has many outstanding strategists. They don't fight against the strategists whom they assist wholeheartedly, so they have a graceful bearing that we can't imagine. Not to mention the emperor's preceptor whose surname was Yuan in Liang's capital, not to mention Nalan Yusi who was far away in Nanjiang, and not to mention the tide-listening pavilions Li Yishan, who had already died. How did these 100,000 refugees appear? How did they willingly submit to Bailiang? How did the Wu castle of the Gourd Mouth come to be? How did they fight to the death against our army? How did Bailiang's pastures, rations, and soldiers move around to help Bailiang fight one country on one land? Zhong Tan nodded. Fortunately, we also have the Order of Peace. Yang Yuanzhan suddenly lowered his voice and said, when you feel that we can break into the city, bring the elites and personally enter the city. Zhong Tan, who had never thought about this, was just about to refuse when Yang Yuanzhan said in a tone that brooked no refusal, Beimang needs heroes. Ever since that loud horn sounded at noon, the walls of Crouching Bao City had become the gates of hell. People were dying at every moment, and the rate at which they were dying was increasing. The Beimang besiegers, who had already been replenished to 20,000 men, were switching out 1,000 men at a faster and faster rate. Even though Zhong Tan had already raised the limit to 200 men, he still couldn't slow down this astonishing rate. The only good news was that after these siege soldiers experienced the first two or even the third siege, they became more and more clear on how to avoid the mud bricks, more and more aware of how to be a bit more vigilant, pay attention to the arrows that shot out from the corner towers. Many northern Mang soldiers who couldn't help but feel their legs go weak during their first siege now completely forgot themselves as they carried their shields and rushed forward. They could already completely ignore the corpses below the city walls, ignore the howls and groans of those who were about to die. Most importantly, they could clearly feel the decline of the city's offensive under their own continuous assault. There was a constant stream of soldiers rushing to the front lines of Crouching Bao City. At the very beginning, there were only 500 soldiers, but now, there were only 300 who were still in good condition. Then, there were less than 100 who were injured, and finally, there were 34 soldiers who had to run up the stairs at the sound of a single command. By the time buried Bao City Lord Zhu Mu, who was overseeing the tall city gate tower, arrived at the city walls, Deputy General Gao Shiqing had already led 200 personal guards to fight on the city walls for more than 2 hours. If it wasn't for the iron spear of this white-haired yet vigorous old general being incomparably powerful, if it wasn't for the fact that there were many outstanding experts among this deputy general's personal guards, the city walls should be filled with northern Mang barbarians right now. Below the inner city walls, the corpses of their fellow soldiers who didn't have time to clean up the mess piled up. In the end, the Crouching Bao City guards could only hold back their tears and throw the corpses down. The corpses piled up like a mountain. Zhu Mu personally led 300 elite soldiers to support Gao Shiqing, slaughtering the 100 or so barbarians who had already jumped onto the city walls to engage in close combat. Zhu Mu wielded a cold blade in both hands, and the momentum of his blade was like a rainbow. 7 or 8 barbarians from the north were chopped in half by his blade alone. However, even if his soldiers managed to push back the ladders that had more than a dozen enemy soldiers to the ground, they still couldn't stop the bloodthirsty Beimang barbarians from climbing up the city walls one after another. Zhu Mu watched as Gao Shiqing, who was known as the Duke of Beautiful Beard, beheaded a Beimang barbarian who looked like a centurion, kicked the headless corpse, and sent another barbarian who had just climbed up the city walls with his blade flying down. Zhu Mu sneered loudly, "Old man Gao, why are you so useless? Didn't you want me to come back and retrieve that spear for you when it's almost dark? There's still more than 2 hours to go before it gets dark." Covered in blood, Gao Shiqing didn't make a sound. He stabbed a barbarian to death with his spear, then swept his spear across and swept away another barbarian who had jumped down from the top of the city walls. Half an hour later, the only cavalry in the city was the first-class cavalry of Yuzhou province, which consisted of 2 riders per person. These 400 barbarians who didn't have a chance to charge out of the city also began to climb the city walls. Before they climbed the city walls, their warhorses, which had been dependent on them for many years, were all killed by them. They didn't want to kill their own mounts with their own hands, so they could only switch horses and silently draw their blades and spears. In the dusk, the setting sun was as red as blood. The main general, Zhu Mu, and the deputy general, Gao Shiqing, stood back to back. Zhu Mu, whose armor was in tatters, gasped for breath. His chest had been heavily injured by a blade, and his vision blurred. He shook his head fiercely and asked with difficulty, "Old man Gao, I, Zhu Mu, am only willing to die in Crouching Bao City because of the group of disappointing wastrels in my family. They all fled Yuzhou and went to Jiangnan. These past few months, I've been looked down upon by a bunch of old fellows. They almost look at me like I'm a Beimang barbarian. That's why I'm willing to die in Crouching Bao City. So what are you after? Didn't you scold me back then? Why did you take the initiative to switch places with Li Qianfu's nephew? Are you tired of living?" Gao Shiqing reached out and pulled out an arrow from his waist. It had broken through his armor but didn't penetrate his bones. He spat out a mouthful of blood. "My entire family stayed in Yuzhou. I'm not as greedy as your son and grandson. I live with a clear conscience. Even if I die in the future, I die with a clear conscience. Gao Shiqing doesn't owe anyone anything in this life. In the second year of Yonghui, you saved my life in Beimang's Tangerine province. This time, I'm here to accompany you. Let's call it even. When we're underground, don't call me brother. I, Gao Shiqing, can't afford to lose face when I see the great general." The top of Crouching Bao City's walls were filled with shouts of, "Kill all the Bailiang bastards." When a group of soldiers far more valiant than the Beimang soldiers who had attacked the city climbed up the walls, Zhu Mu's hands were first chopped off, then his head. Gao Shiqing's back was against the city wall. 5 or 6 iron spears pierced through his body. The old general died while holding a spear. In the night, one of the vanguard general's personal guards stood on top of the city wall and blew the last horn on the battlefield. Regardless of whether it was friend or foe, the nearly 20,000 dead people inside and outside Crouching Bao City were destined not to hear this sound. Zhong Tan, who had contributed greatly to Beimang's Yuzhou front, slowly closed his eyes. He seemed to hear it. The wind blew through Crouching Bao City. It was as if he was weeping and complaining. Chapter 1383. If it were not for the severely worded urgent letter from the Bailiang Protectorate, the commander of the Bailiang Infantry, Yan Wenluan, would not be standing on the walls of Xiaoguang City right now, but on the walls of Luanhe City. Thus, when the news of the Beimang vanguard breaking through Crouching Bao City in a single day spread back, the Yuzhou military and political bigwigs all felt a lingering fear. If something had happened to Great General Yan, then what was the point of defending the Gourd Gate? It must be known that in the past 2 or 3 years, the Yuzhou military would always say, "It doesn't make a difference whether Bailiang has His Royal Highness or not, but Yuzhou has General Yan or not." Of course, there was no one who dared to say such shameful words now. Yan Wenluan and Chen Yunxue, the 2 stabilizing forces of Yuzhou, walked side by side to a ballista nicknamed Brother Nine Oxen. Among the Bailiang ballistae, the 9 Oxen and 2 Tigers ballistae were widely distributed in the major cities. Yan Wenluan weighed the huge ballista that was no different from a javelin with a calm expression, but the thoughts of the people behind him were more or less the same as that ballista. According to the plan, Crouching Bao City would not be able to hold on to the death if Beimang only sent 150,000 soldiers south. However, even though Beimang had sent twice as many soldiers to the Eastern Front as expected, Crouching Bao City was still not able to hold on for even a single day. This was truly shocking. He Zhonghu, who was personally in charge of the military affairs of the 3 cities at the Gourd Gate, could curse Zhu Mu and Gao Shiqing to vent his anger, but the others did not have the guts or the heart to do so. After all, the 6,000 people of Crouching Bao City had already died in battle. The dead were the most important. Moreover, when had those people ever embarrassed the Yuzhou army? "Huang Fu," she said with a complicated expression, "Beimang's infantry not only has a large number of refined bows and crossbows, they also have a total of 600 catapults. First, they used 20,000 men to take turns attacking the city. Despite the heavy losses, General Zhong Tan still ordered them to replenish each chili arch with 1,000 men, and they fought until they broke through Lying Bao City." He Zhong suddenly sneered. "The Beimang barbarians are using Crouching Bao City to train their troops. Even an idiot would know that once these bastards break through Crouching Bao City, they'll definitely tear down half the city. When the time comes to attack Luanhe, the catapults won't just fire 2 rounds. Yan Wenluan asked calmly, "Have the 800 cavalry in Luanhe City been recalled?" Huang Fujin nodded and said, "He's already on his way back to Shiguang City." No one had expected the Beimang barbarians to attack the city with such ferocity. They didn't even give the crouching Bao City's cavalry a chance to harass them. If that Zhong Tan wasn't so stubborn, the Beimang infantry would have lost at least 2,000 to 3,000 men. He Zhong slammed his fist on the city wall and said with great heartache, "They're all good men of our Yuzhou." Yan Wenluan gently put down the arrow. The Shiguang city lord, Xianxia, secretly swallowed his saliva and mustered up his courage to say, "Great general, because we moved the Liuzhou soldiers out of crouching Bao City and Luanhe City, a commotion has occurred in Luanhe City." The moment this sensitive topic was brought up, everyone, including He Zhong and Huang Fuxi, looked at Yan Wenluan cautiously. Yan Wenluan's expression remained the same. She said indifferently, "A commotion? Aren't you making it sound too easy? What? You, Xianxia, are related to Luanhe City's Yang Tua by marriage, so you're helping him play dumb? If I remember correctly, the Hupong camp of Luanhe City that threatened the great general with a mutiny is one of the few old battalions in Yuzhou. Their two captains were the trusted subordinates of Zhong Hongwu and Lu Yuanji. When Zhong Hongwu lost his position, that captain of ours removed his armor and resigned to show his loyalty. That's fine, since most of the soldiers under Zhong Hongwu's command are like that. However, Sun Shu, who was once old Lu's personal guard, shouldn't be so daring. Tell me, everyone present, how many of you are dissatisfied with me retreating the Liuzhou soldiers from the front lines? No one on the city wall dared to breathe too loudly, especially Shiguang City's great general Xianxia and his two deputies. They had already dropped to their knees, not daring to utter a single word of apology. He Zhong hurriedly tried to smooth things over, saying helplessly, "Look at what you're saying. You're already putting on such a pretentious front. Who would dare to speak the truth to you?" Yan Wenluan didn't say anything. He Zhong sighed and smiled at the three generals of Shiguang City. He said amiably, "All of you rise. How many times has the great general said that a man's knees are not for kneeling to others? 2 of you have been to Mount Qingliang and met the great general before. When have you not been told to just cup your fists and salute?" Yan Wenluan suddenly said, "Hupong camp, remove its name." With these words, even He Zhong's expression changed, to say nothing of the kneeling Xianxia and the other two. If the Bailiang Old Battalion lost a battle, or even won a battle but lost to the other old battalions, it would be as uncomfortable as being stabbed. As for removing its name, that would be even more uncomfortable than being killed. In Bailiang, even if all of the old battalions died in battle, they could still retain their name. In fact, all of the old battalions loved to compete with each other. Over the years, they would first compete to see who had killed the most enemies and whose battle prowess was superior. In the end, they would even compare the number of times their battalion had been wiped out. Moreover, the one who won in the last round would be very convincing. For example, the Xiandeng camp, which was one of the oldest battalions along with the Lotus Seed camp, the Partridge camp, and the Horse camp, relied on this to win first place. For many years, they had called themselves the First Old Battalion. Even if they were a small soldier, they would always be arrogant when they saw the commandants or captains of other battalions on the road. As a result, there was a strange phenomenon in the Bailiang frontier army that outsiders could not understand. There was often a saying, "A captain in this life, a general in the next life." This meant that the leaders of the old battalions would rather be captains for their entire lives than be generals with a higher rank. If they wanted to be generals, they would rather be generals in their next lives. Removing the name of Hupong camp meant that there would be no more Hupong camp in the world. It meant that all of the efforts of the seniors who had died in battle and who had retired due to injuries would be wasted. In particular, the martyrs of the old battalions who had died in battle in other places would become lonely ghosts who would never be able to rest in peace in the eyes of the Bailiang frontier army. Yan Wenluan tilted his head and lightly spat on the ground. He still spoke in a lukewarm tone. "What kind of bullshit is this? Compared to those old battalions in Liang province, they're 10 streets behind." The old general left Shiguang City just like that. Huang Fuxi's expression was strange, but he could not leave Shiguang City for the time being. He could only silently send off this infantry commander to the outskirts of the city before rushing back to the city walls. Sure enough, no one had left. They did not move at all. Xianxia and the other two were still kneeling with their heads lowered. He Zhonghui, who had always been good-natured and easy to talk to, suddenly had a frighteningly gloomy expression on his face. Lu Zhonghui, the deputy general of Xiaguang City, as well as the commander of another old battalion, this middle-aged general with more scars than his son, was actually sobbing like an aggrieved child. Lu Zhonghui's cavalry blocking camp was precisely the old battalions that Yan Wenluan had single-handedly created. Back then, the roads in western Shu were rugged, making it unsuitable for the Su family's cavalry to gallop through. The cavalry blocking camp, which had already displayed its brilliance during the Battle of Western Rampart, had made even more contributions. They were known as the cavalry blocking camp. Even the vanguard general Chu Lushan, who had led a 1,000-man army into Shu, had not been stingy with his praise. Yan Wenluan's bullshit wasn't some sarcastic remark, but a slap to his own face as the commander of Bailiang's infantry. He Zhonghui suddenly placed his hands on the city walls. With his back facing everyone, he said softly, "How can he not be sad that Crouching Bao City is gone? In all of Bailiang, if old Yan doesn't feel sorry for Calabash City, who would feel more sorry for him? Not only Calabash City, but all of the Yuzhou infantry were personally trained by him. Is he really willing to let our Yuzhou soldiers die before the Lu province soldiers? That's impossible. Right now, the tens of thousands of Lu province soldiers on the border of Yuzhou, as well as those from Liangzhou, including the locals of Liuzhou, and those who have taken root in Lingzhou, are all watching us." He Zhonghui took a deep breath and said sternly, "Send an order to Luanhe City. Tiger Pouncing Camp is to be stripped of its name. Lieutenant Sun Shu and the other captains are to be allowed to participate in the defense of the city. If they feel that this rebellion isn't enough to vent their anger, then fine. If they have the ability, then go and kill Luanhe General Yang Qiuo. At worst, I, He Zhonghui, will personally lead the troops to quell the rebellion." Xianxia clenched his teeth and said, "This general begs the great general to allow the soldiers of Tiger Pouncing Camp to redeem themselves. Give them a chance to take back their old name." He Zhonghui suddenly turned around and kicked the Sunrise City Lord away. "Do you think that Yan Wenluan is the only one who is angry at Luanhe City at such a crucial time? Do you think that the 600 li urgent letter only told our great general Yan not to personally take the risk? Chu Lushan of the Protectorate General, our Lord Protector General, has already said, if the soldiers of Yuzhou refuse to be controlled, although the war in Liangzhou is tense, we can still send out a few capable generals to defend the city. Listen, even Chu Lushan wants your in-laws to scram out of Luanhe City. So what if I, He Zhonghui, agree?" The infantry commander had already left. Although Deputy Commander He Zhonghui didn't immediately leave Sunrise City, he was so angry that his face was ashen. He quickly walked down the city walls. Huang Fushi, who was following behind He Zhonghui, asked, "Will it be too much?" He Zhonghui waved his hand and said heavily, "Our Yuzhou army isn't that delicate." Huang Fushi continued to ask, "Then what about the 200 or so ordinary soldiers who followed Tiger Pouncing Camp and wanted to leave the city? What about them?" He Zhonghui coldly said, "What's there to ask? Of course they will be dealt with according to military law. Immediately executed." Huang Fushi looked at his back and continued to ask, "General He, I'm asking about their family members in Yuzhou. What about them?" He Zhonghui suddenly paused. There was a long silence. Chapter 1384. Huang Fushi said softly, 200 or so people, this general will consider all of them to have died in battle. If Mount Qingliang and the Protectorate ask about it in the future, I will take responsibility." He Zhong suddenly turned around. "Huang Fushi, what are you planning?" Huang Fushi smiled but did not say anything. He Zhong suddenly narrowed his eyes and said slowly, "Huang Fushi, to be honest, I really don't like you as a Yuzhou general. Even if you did me a favor this time, I still hate you. I've seen too many smart people like you." Huang Fushi smiled calmly. "If I were really smart, shouldn't I just do things and not say anything?" He Zhong suddenly smiled and turned to leave. He sighed softly, If the great general was still alive, even if he didn't come to Shiguang City, he would have made an appearance at the protectorate and not be like this. Let alone people, we can't even see the shadow of our king of Bailiang. Huang Fu, she wanted to say something but hesitated. In the end, he did not say anything. Half a day later, in Luanhe City, on a drill ground, the doors were tightly shut. All that was left was a battalion of uniformed soldiers. 2,726 people. They had all arrived. The old barracks attached the most importance to the old rules. Often, the number of people they had at the time of the establishment was the number of people they would have in the future. Apart from a few old barracks that had too few people at the time of their establishment, the vast majority of the old barracks had the same number of people. In the Bailiang army, apart from the great general Su Zhao's Su banner, there was only one other type of army that could raise a banner other than the Su banner. Back then, the Bailiang Protector General Qin Jibao could not raise the Qin banner. The current cavalry commander Yuan Zhuozong could not raise the Yuan banner either. However, the Lotus Seed Camp could, the Horse Camp could, the Partridge Camp could, and even the old barracks that had the 2 Tiger Pounce banners flapping in the wind this morning could. However, from now on, they would be the same as the ordinary border army of Bailiang. They could not. The deputy general of Shiguang City and the lieutenant of the cavalry blocking camp, Lu Zhonghui Shu, personally brought a military order and a message to Luanhe City and the Tiger Pounce camp. As a deputy general, he brought the military order to Luanhe City's Master General Yang Tua. The military order was to remove the name of Hupong Battalion. He then arrived at the Hupong camp as a lieutenant of the blocking cavalry camp. He did not enter the camp. At the entrance, he said a few words to Sun Shu, whose face was full of tears. First, I ask your entire camp to die in battle. When you see the seniors below, you can go kneel. On the martial arts field, Sun Shu stood at the front with an expressionless face. Beside her were 23 senior captains and 47 deputy captains of the old Tiger Pounce battalion. Many of them even raised their arms to cover their faces. Sun Shu said solemnly, "It is I, Sun Shu, who have let you all down. I have let down all the seniors who died in the Tiger Pouncing camp." Sun Shu pounded her chest with her fist. "I don't understand General Yan's military orders. I don't understand the first one, and I'm not convinced by the second one. I can't accept it from the bottom of my heart." Sun Shu rubbed her face and smiled bitterly. "But it's useless to be unconvinced. Could it be that our Tiger Pouncing camp is really going to mutiny and rebel in Phoenix Crane City like Great General?" he said. Sun Shu looked at those faces and said in a low voice, "I don't care if you have such thoughts or not, but if anyone dares to do so, I'll be the first to chop them to death. If you do, come out and fight me one-on-one? Become a lieutenant first." Sun Shu suddenly laughed. "You brats, I can knock down an entire group of you with one hand." In the crowd, someone suddenly shouted, "Lieutenant, if I kill a few more Beimang barbarians tomorrow, can General Yan return the title of Tiger Pouncing Camp to us?" Sun Shu did not lie to these brothers and shook her head. Sun Shu suddenly shouted outside the martial arts field, "Yang Tua, take your men and scram. I'm an old soldier of Yozhou's Tiger Pouncing camp, not a rebel. Tomorrow, if my brothers and I don't kill as many as 7,000 of you, I, Sun Shu, will be your junior. I'll be reincarnated as your son." Hearing the torrential curses from the martial arts field, Luanhe City's Master General Yang Tuo rubbed his ears and smiled bitterly at the 2 deputies beside him. "Don't worry. Let's go." However, before he left, Yang Piao shouted back, "Sun, remember this. If you don't kill as many as we do in the next few days, remember to be Yang Tuo's obedient son." Mother Ker, the sound of swords being unsheathed could be heard from the martial arts field. Yang Tuo hurriedly left with his men. At this moment, Hong Jingyan's Ruran cavalry was the same as before. They were about to arrive outside Yuzhou City, but they were destined not to participate in the siege. Of course, this meant that Luanhe City, which was better equipped than Crouching Bao City, was about to welcome a battle to the death. Beimang had a total of 500,000 soldiers. In the commander's tent, a fat man was walking around the Bailiang sand table again and again. No one knew what this king of the south courtyard was muttering to himself. Fatty Dong walked to the sand table near the western region and stopped for a moment. He then circled to Jizhou and stopped again. When he saw the area between Bailiang and western Shu, he also stopped for a moment. Finally, he walked to the center of the table and placed his hands on the table. He said softly, "Once Crouching Bao City was conquered, the entire Central Plains must be cursing Bailiang for being a pile of shit and the Su family's iron cavalry for bragging." Dong Zhuo habitually tapped his teeth. "I know you're definitely not hiding in Mount Qingliang. You have 3 choices. You can break through the western region of Lu province and deal with those monks on Mount Lantua in the western region. Or you can go to the border of western Shu and make a face-to-face deal with Chenjibao and cut off some meat for Bailiang. Or you can go to the horizontal water silver harrier in Jizhou and help Yuzhou clean up the mess the new lord of Liang gave you." The fat man lowered his voice and muttered to himself, "I don't care if you go to western Shu. If you go to Jizhou, those 20,000 low-level cavalry who didn't get any benefits because of Wei Jingtang will definitely not be enough. If you go to the western region, then it'll be a real headache. Do you think I can arrange for a governor or a general to personally lead an army of tens of thousands to wait for you there? Even if I'm willing, others won't be." Dong Zhuo began circling the table again. "Why don't you throw a copper coin and guess if there's any words?" "That won't do. You can't play around with national affairs." "That's right. Dong Zhuo, you're the king of the southern courtyard today. You have to be careful when you do things." "Yes. That's reasonable. But why are you guys still standing there like idiots? Hurry up and give me a copper coin." When Huda City, the largest town in the northwest of Liang dynasty, was being bombarded by more than 1,000 catapults, the Bailiang Protectorate, which was not far from Huda City, was still operating quickly and orderly. The Protector General even had the leisure time to sit in front of a sand table that included the terrain of Yu River and Ji provinces, taking the time to pay attention to the battle that was about to unfold in Luanhe City. The Yuzhou army didn't care much about the movement in Luanhe City, treating it as a local general acting on impulse. But those who had the qualifications to stand in the main hall of the Protectorate knew that Protector General Chu wanted to kill. If not for the words of Su Weisheng, who had yet to leave this place, Chu Lushan really wouldn't have cared about whether or not Yan Wenluan would be humiliated. He would have already sent people to Luanhe City to take over the border. For this reason, the deputy commander of the infantry, Great Ancestor Gu, had already argued with Chu Lushan. Many other great generals, including Zhou Kang, had been forced to act as mediators. Chu Lushan stood in front of the sand table, his hands clasped together as he lightly patted the back of his hands. This wasn't just a matter of military talent. The position one stood in would also affect the way a general on the battlefield thought. General talent and commander talent only differed by a single word. They seemed to be very close, but in reality, they were as far apart as the clouds and mud. Su Weisheng sat on a chair, a thick blanket covering his knees. Yuan Zhuozong was present, as was Qi Danghua. Chapter 1385. Interesting. Even though they had different surnames, they were still one family. Su Weisheng gazed at the sand table and said softly, "Judging from the losses we suffered at Hidden Bao City, even if Yang Yuanzhan's method is very Central Plains, he'll still be able to take down 150,000 or even more Beimang with only 40,000 men. After all, this battle will only get more and more difficult." However, the top generals on both sides are well aware that Xiaguang City will be a turning point. After taking down Sunglo, once Yozhou's gates are wide open, Northern Mang will have even more tactical options. Whether it's a cavalry battle, a foot battle, besieging a stronghold to strike back at reinforcements, specifically targeting Yozhou's limited cavalry, or even directly abandoning Yozhou's cities and focusing on supporting their central line main army. Qi Danghua said softly, "If only Beimang had taken the bait from the start and attacked Liuzhou with all their strength. Their supply lines would have been filled with holes." Su Weisheng shook his head. If they really wanted to attack Liuzhou, it wouldn't be a matter of supply lines anymore. Dong Zhuo and that peace magistrate have the ability to turn their supply lines into bait and lure us in. Yuan Zhuozong nodded. With 1 million troops pressing down on the border, It can be said that half of Beimang's southern court is cutting off meat for the sake of smooth supply lines. In truth, it's not just the southern court that's bleeding heavily, mobilizing no less than 1 million cows and sheep. Orange and West prefectures have also been mobilized. Following Northern Court King Toba Bodhisattva's resolution, he's starting to lead his troops down Liuzhou. Beimang is basically using the power of the entire country to fight this fierce battle. Even if we want to launch a surprise attack, it can't be called a surprise anymore. Chu Lushan, who had been randomly looking around the sand table, suddenly stared at a certain spot at the mouth of the gourd and muttered to himself, "What if?" Qi Dangwa couldn't understand at all. Yuan Zhuozong was in deep thought, quickly weighing the pros and cons. Only Su Weisheng directly rejected the idea. "No, it's too risky. This is seriously contrary to Bailiang's original strategy." The confused Qi Dangwa turned around to look towards Yuan Zhuozong, who was also a great general's adopted son. The latter chuckled and said, "The true significance of the Calabash opening's existence, apart from the surface depletion of Northern Mang's military strength, has an even deeper special meaning. The Calabash opening is blessed by the heavens in terms of its territory, not only for Yuzhou, but for all of northern Liang. At the time, Foster Father and Sir Li had prepared for the worst. If Liangzhou was breached, then there were 3 paths of retreat. The first was to lead the army back to western Shu, where they would sit in Shu and rely on Nanzhao. This was the best plan. Now, the second was to enter the western regions through Liuzhou, but this was the worst plan. After all, we did not have a stable foundation in the western regions. The third plan of retreat was to defend the west and north of Yuzhou to the death. If necessary, we could hold both Hezhou and Jizhou in our hands. Regardless of the feelings of the Liang imperial court, Bailiang would forcefully pull out another horizontal battle line. The key point of this strategy was to treat Calabash Mouth as Xiangfan City of the Central Plains. Yuan Zhuozong pointed at the mouth of the gourd and said slowly, "Lord Protector General wants to have a surprise battle at the mouth of the gourd. He wants me or General Zhou to lead the elite cavalry to the mouth of the gourd and swallow Yang Yuanzhan's army in the west. In this way, Liangzhou and Liuzhou, which were already lacking in forces, would become even more powerless. But if we were lucky enough to succeed, the risk would be great, but the benefits would be great as well." Su Weisheng said in a low voice, "There is no such thing as luck in the world. We can't afford to gamble, and Bailiang is not at the point where we have to gamble." Qi Dangwa secretly revealed an expression of "you're on your own." Yuan Zhuozong smiled faintly. Chu Lushan thought for a while and said, "The worst-case scenario for Bailiang is to make Beimang hand over 600,000 soldiers, even if we have to risk everything. This is not difficult." If it was someone else who said this, even if it was Zhou Kong, the deputy commander of Bailiang's cavalry, he would be criticized for bragging to the heavens. But when it came from Chu Lushan, people were willing to believe it wholeheartedly. Chu Lushan, who had been crossing his fingers, slightly bent one of his fingers and pointed at the direction of Jibei. Wei Jingtang finally found his conscience and didn't abandon Transverse Water City. Because Transverse Water City is still there, Yu Wandao didn't degenerate to the point of using 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry to attack Silver Sparrow City, which was almost given to Beimang by Jibei with 20,000 soldiers. Actually, the current situation is not so bad. At least Gu Jiantang didn't yell at Beimang's westernmost border army, "Brothers, you should go and attack Yuzhou now. Don't always look at me affectionately. If you leave, Gu Jiantang, promise that I won't see anything. Also, that Emperor Zhao from Liyang hasn't asked the Ministry of Revenue to allow Bailiang's people to change their household registration. He hasn't asked Hezhou and other places to open their doors like prostitutes, refusing to accept Bailiang's money and even paying for it." Yuan Zhuozong coughed lightly. He also realized that it wasn't appropriate to say this in front of Su Weisheng. Chu Lushan chuckled, and the fearless Protector General hurriedly changed the topic. "I don't really know how to play chess. Well, if I play 100 games with Foster Father, I can still win 100 games." Qi Dangwa rubbed his chin and smiled knowingly. After joking around, Chu Lushan continued, "Wei Jingtang and Transverse Autumn City are variables. We're just as unprepared as Beimang. Let's see who can seize the opportunity. Besides, His Highness is also there. This time, Su Weisheng flew into a rage. He directly called out his name and scolded, "Chu Lushan! Did you eat a bear's heart or a leopard's gall?" Qi Dangguo was given a fright and felt like he was falling into the clouds. Yuan Zhuozong softly said, "It's too risky. Even if His Highness leads the cavalry of the hidden Luandao to break through the 20,000 Beimang light cavalry that traveled a long distance without any support, they might stop there. At most, they'll head west and fight a few small battles. But if we send out additional troops, we'll be forcing His Highness and the 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry to fight a major battle outside the mouth of the gourd. And right now, Hong Jingyan's Ruran cavalry has yet to move. The Yuzhou army is separated by half the mouth of the gourd. Even if our cavalry joins up with His Highness, it's still too risky. This risk is even greater than me leading an army to the mouth of the gourd to eat Yang Yuanzun." Chu Lushan uncrossed his fingers and raised his arm. He rubbed his eyebrows with his 2 index fingers as he stared at the mouth of the gourd. "Do you think that I'm forcing His Highness? No, it's His Highness who's forcing us." Chu Lushan picked up a bamboo pole and fiercely poked the mouth of the gourd on the sand table. With a ferocious face, he said, "His Highness wants to tell Yuzhou and Bailiang that during the war, he, the king of Bailiang, Su Fengnian, will be here." Su Weisheng seemed to want to stand up. After struggling for a while, he sat down quietly, closed his eyes, and bit his lips in silence. Yuan Zhuozong smiled happily. He squinted his phoenix eyes and exuded a strange elegance. This was the first time he had not concealed his long-dormant sharpness since he became the commander of the Bailiang cavalry. "Then let's do it." After Su Weisheng opened his eyes, he calmly looked at Bailiang Governor-General with a sharp gaze. "Huta City can be defended for 40 days? Su Weisheng looked at the 3 and said in a low voice, "If we can't do it, none of our soldiers will be able to leave the border of Liangzhou." Chu Lushan snorted, "At least." Before Su Weisheng looked at him, White Bear, Yuan Zhuozong only showed her his back that was already far away. After crossing the threshold, Yuan Zhuozong, who always paid attention to his appearance, stretched himself and shook his neck. After doing all this, Yuan Zhuozong quickly walked out of Bailiang Governor-General's house. On the same day, a cavalry of 10,000 quietly left the station. The 300,000 cavalry of Bailiang were the best in the world. And this cavalry was the Bailiang army. The Great Snow Dragon Cavalry. A cavalry of 6,000 showed up outside the mouth of the gourd. The leader was wearing armor, holding a spear and a cold saber. Chapter 1386. Before Su Fengnian met with Wei Jingtang, the general of Horizontal Water City, Yu Luandao's Yuzhou cavalry had already engaged the 20,000 Mang cavalry. The Mang cavalry was a light cavalry that was temporarily transferred from Gu Jiantang's eastern front. Their original intention was to launch a swift assault and devour both Horizontal Water City and Gu Jiantang's Silver Harrier cities, which were isolated outside the Great Wall. With that, they would be able to squeeze the 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry into Jibei. At that time, the Yuzhou cavalry would run out of food and fodder, and the left wing of Beimang would naturally return empty-handed. However, because of the existence of Wei Jingtang and Horizontal Water City, the Yuzhou cavalry did not dare to recklessly march south. When their scouts found out that Silver Harrier, which was further west, was different from Hengshui City, they had already retreated as promised. The 2 generals, who were originally flying into a rage, calmed down and had a discussion. They came to the conclusion that they could abandon Hengshui City and occupy Silver Harrier, which would still be able to intimidate the Yuzhou cavalry to a certain extent. However, the opportunity on the battlefield was fleeting. After they stopped at the north of Horizontal Water City for a day, when their exhausted army of 20,000 charged toward Silver Harrier, they were ambushed by 5,000 Yuzhou cavalry from the side about 100 miles away from the border city. The 2 generals and Yu Luandao both knew that both armies were exhausted, and the key was to see who would snap first. When the Yuzhou cavalry learned that Silver Harrier had been abandoned, their deputy general suggested a quick return. It was at this moment that Yu Luandao's stubbornness was fully displayed. He insisted on fighting a fierce battle before Beimeng obtained the two border cities, even at the cost of damaging the horses' stamina and causing a large number of cavalrymen to fall behind. Although the two deputy generals, who had a steady personality, disagreed with him, but the instinct of Beiliang's soldiers to strictly abide by their orders made the two generals unable to disobey Yu Luandao's bold decision. In the end, after the Yuzhou cavalry had marched for 500 miles in 3 days, they were gradually divided into 3 groups of cavalry. Yu Luandao, who had better horses and stronger cavalry, personally led the vanguard of 5,000 cavalrymen and finally arrived at the battlefield in time. Like a sharp arrow, they pierced right into the ribs of Beimeng's army without any warning, completing their strategic goal of fighting a battle outside of Ji City. With the sudden intrusion of the Yuzhou cavalry, the Beimeng cavalry was caught unprepared and brutally penetrated their formation. After that, the Yuzhou cavalry even broke the formation of the Mang cavalry, causing them to lose contact with each other. As the two flustered and exasperated generals were sent to Ji province, they must be the brave and valiant generals who were good at fighting on the eastern border of Beimeng. Although the situation was not favorable for them, they were not going to just sit there and wait for death. In a battle where a large number of cavalrymen were involved, the death of several thousand men was not a small number. However, once the battle was turned into a pursuit by one side, the death of over 10,000 men would be considered a small number. As a result, the two generals who each led over 10,000 men decided to surround the 5,000 Yuzhou cavalry like dumplings. Although they were destined to win, the result would still be miserable. However, compared to the result of the Yuzhou cavalry killing over 10,000 men, it was definitely much better. However, the penetrative power and destructive power of Yuzhou's 5,000 cavalry left all of the northern Mang cavalry's 1,000 men commanders trembling in fear. In the 3 clashes, even though it could be said that Yuzhou's cavalry relied on surprise attacks to seize the advantage in numbers, more than 2,000 northern Mang cavalry died on the spot. This still left the northern Mang cavalry speechless. The elite cavalry armies on the Liang-Tu Expanse's border that had experienced many battles only had this type of ability at most. Yu Luandao did not lead the 5,000 Yuzhou cavalry into a fierce battle. Instead, after a few successful assaults, he intentionally or unintentionally moved the battlefield further west. Both generals weighed the stamina of their own cavalry and found that the gap between the two armies had a slight deviation in tactics. The cavalry at the back of the Beimeng cavalry wanted to change their horses and fight again, while the cavalry closer to the Silver Harrier cavalry would chase after them. Actually, this deviation was based on the difference in the number of soldiers that both sides had sent into the battlefield. In fact, it was not a fatal mistake for the Beimeng cavalry. Although the Beimeng cavalry had suffered heavy casualties, there were still over 8,000 Yuzhou cavalry in front of them. With their decisive pursuit, not only could they catch up with the Yuzhou cavalry, they could also join forces with the cavalry at the back and fill up the gap, forming an absolute advantage in terms of numbers. However, when the second cavalry of over 3,000 Yuzhou cavalry arrived on the battlefield, it had messed up the Mang cavalry's plan. All the Yuzhou cavalry were light cavalry, but obviously, this cavalry had sacrificed time in exchange for better equipment. The 8,000 Beimeng cavalry who were chasing after Yu Luandao's cavalry at the same level as the front line of Ji North were smashed by this Yuzhou cavalry. Like a fierce horse charging into a field of wheat, they reaped the lives of over 1,000 Mang cavalry in just a blink of an eye. On top of that, Yu Luandao's main cavalry had launched their assault at the same time. The 7,000 Yuzhou cavalry, whose morale was high, were now facing the 7,000 Mang cavalry who were covered in wounds and frightened by the mere twang of a bow. How could the latter fight back? On the other hand, the 10,000 Mang cavalry at the back were fierce and tough as well. They quickly turned their horses around, wanting to return the favor and cut the Yuzhou cavalry in half. But right at this moment, 2 more fresh forces appeared on both sides of the battlefield. Although their numbers were not large, the blow they brought to the Beimeng cavalry's morale was immeasurable. One of them was the 2,000 Yuzhou cavalry who raised a banner with the character Su on it, while the other was the banner of Horizontal Water City. They were fewer in number, only 600 cavalrymen led by Wei Jingtang of Horizontal Water City. However, that northern Mang great commander at the back of the battlefield was already terrified to the extreme, naturally feeling the urge to retreat. Didn't this great one say that if this great one didn't lose a single soldier, he would be rewarded with great contributions? Now, he didn't even touch the walls of 2 cities, yet he was already beaten up so miserably. It wasn't that he couldn't save those several thousand cavalry, but after saving them, this great one could only return to being some damn 1,000-man commander. Therefore, the generals Hui Lilu, who was still fighting desperately on the battlefield, felt his heart turn cold. The generals who were drinking and chatting with him in his tent yesterday had run away just like that. Fortunately, Hui Lilu and his 600 personal cavalry charged north and tore open a hole. Afterwards, the Mang cavalry continued to flee north. On purpose, Yu Luandao did not even look at Hui Lilu and the 3,000 Mang cavalry behind him. Instead, he gazed into the distance, staring at the other Beimang generals, Lang Xin, who was slowly retreating. He purposely left that hole. If Lang Xin and his 10,000 cavalrymen were determined to fight to the death, Yu Luandao's Yuzhou cavalry would only have 2,000 to 3,000 left. This was not because Yu Luandao feared a battle to the death. Otherwise, he would not have come to the north of Silver Sparrow Crossing Water to fight this battle. Instead, he used his Yuzhou cavalry to fight to the death against the 20,000 men that Gu Jiantang should have taken care of. This was completely meaningless to Bailiang. However, while it was meaningless to exchange 1 life for 2 or 3 lives, it did not mean that it was meaningless to exchange 1 life for 10 lives. That was why Yu Luandao purposely had Hui Lilu bring his 3,000 crippled cavalry that were in complete disarray to bring disaster to Lang Xin's 10,000 cavalrymen. Yu Luandao, who was known as the pride of West Chu, after Chao Chongqing, risked universal condemnation and rushed to the dynasty's northwest alone. After entering Bailiang, he deeply understood what a border iron cavalry was, and he also had a comprehensive understanding of the Beimang cavalry. He knew that it was extremely difficult to beat the Beimang elites into complete defeat and then wantonly chase them down. However, if he could bring disaster to the north, then there would be a chance. In fact, Yu Luandao did not even need to make any specific arrangements. When he and his 800 cavalrymen took the lead in chasing after Hui Lilu's 3,000 cavalrymen, another 2,000 cavalrymen who were temporarily unkillable caught up with them. Together with the 600 cavalrymen from Horizontal Water City and the 2,000 Yuzhou cavalrymen who were the last to enter the battlefield, they all began to charge northward. After Hui Lilu brought his remaining cavalrymen and fled northward, Lang Xin, whose face was livid with rage, had the urge to slaughter all of them when he saw those bastards charging at him recklessly. However, when he saw those Yuzhou cavalrymen who took out their light crossbows and, leisurely, shot at Hui Lilu's cavalrymen, or when he sped up, he did not even need to exert any force with his saber. He only needed to borrow the momentum of his warhorse to lift up his saber and cut a large wound on the neck of the Beimang cavalryman. It was an easy and effortless move, but it was definitely enough to kill them all. Lang Xin roared and ordered his men to speed up their retreat. The 20,000 cavalrymen from Beimang had rushed to the battlefield of Jibei in a hurry. Although they were also riding 2 horses each like the Yuzhou cavalrymen, even though Lang Xin knew the consequences of being hunted down by an army of cavalrymen, he could only wish that his warhorse had 8 legs right now. When Hui Lilu and his personal cavalrymen caught up with the rear of Lang Xin's army, more than 2,000 of the remaining 3,000 cavalrymen who were lucky to break through the encirclement had been killed silently. In the 6 hours of long pursuit and escape, more than 2,000 of Lang Xin's cavalrymen were killed by the tireless Yuzhou cavalrymen. Like a cat catching a mouse, men from Beimang cavalrymen were dying all the time, and small groups of cavalrymen were breaking away from the main army and fleeing in all directions. Finally, before night fell, the chief general of Yuzhou cavalrymen who had a handsome face finally stopped his pursuit after personally killing Hui Lilu. Chapter 1387. The 600 cavalrymen from Transverse Water City followed the Yuzhou cavalrymen and collected military merits. Their main task at the border of Liyang was to defend the city. Although they had never participated in a war like today, where both sides had more than 30,000 cavalrymen, they had never stopped engaging in small-scale skirmishes. It happened every now and then. The Transverse Water City cavalrymen, who were known as the elite of Ji province, did not fall into a disadvantage. But who would have thought that killing Beimeng barbarians was as easy as harvesting wheat in June and July? As the veteran soldiers of Ji province, which was also an important border area like Beiliang, the soldiers of Ji province had their own pride honed from years of fighting on the battlefield. Therefore, when they heard that Kai Nan, a general under Gu Jiantong's direct command, appeared at the border of Beiliang with 60,000 cavalrymen and encountered Old Liang who only brought 10,000 cavalrymen to the south, none of them dared to challenge him. It was said that Kai Nan was the first to kneel down, as if his knees were weak. It was as if he brought 60,000 cavalrymen to be inspected by Su Shao. This farce was widely spread in Ji province and the capital. But what the outsiders could not understand was that Kai Nan, who was given the title of General Kneeling with 60,000, was not reprimanded by the Ministry of War. Even Gu Jiantang, who was in charge of the military affairs of northern region, did not seem to be dissatisfied. Kai Nan's official hat was still on his head. After this battle, Transverse Water City of Ji province finally understood that the 300,000 cavalrymen of Su family were collectively called the 300,000 cavalrymen of Su family. The real cavalry was about 120,000 cavalrymen, and the main force was in the north of Liangzhou. Among them, Yuzhou, who was mainly infantry, had less than 20,000 cavalrymen. Then, Su family casually let an unknown newcomer of Beiliang, Yu Wandao, lead 10,000 cavalrymen and killed 12,000 Beimeng cavalrymen with less than 3,000 casualties. On the way back, the general of the 600 cavalrymen of Transverse Water City could not hold back his curiosity. He ran to the young General Yu, who was covered in blood, and carefully asked if the cavalrymen of Beiliang were all as sharp as his Yuzhou cavalrymen. Yu Wandao shook his head. That Transverse Water City cavalry leader felt relieved. Then, Yu Wandao smiled and said that the Liang province cavalry was much stronger than the Serene province cavalry. That old cavalryman from Jizhou, who thought that all 600 cavalrymen under his command were elites, immediately broke down. Finally, Yu Wandao said that there was a saying in the Beiliang frontier army that if the two Liao provinces of Beimeng and Beiliang were counted, there might be more than 1 million cavalry in the world. But ultimately, there were only 3 types of cavalry in the world. The Beiliang cavalry is one type, and the other cavalry armies are the second type. The leader of the traversing water cavalry was completely puzzled. There's another type? Yu Wandao smiled and said, it's the cavalry that scared Kai Nan's 60,000 troops into kneeling down. There aren't many of them, only 10,000. The old cavalryman swallowed his saliva and dared not say anything. At that time, Yu Wandao lamented softly, your Jizhou doesn't understand, and neither does Liang, because the ancestors of the Zhao clan have burned incense. The leader of the traversing water cavalry dared not say anything. Around the 600 cavalrymen of Hengshui were the Yuzhou cavalry that remained silent regardless of whether they were fighting on the battlefield or returning victorious. After Su Fengnian, wearing the root-like mask, secretly met with Wei Jingtang, Yu Wandao, who was waiting outside traversing Water City, personally accompanied Su Fengnian back to Silver Harrier. At this time, the Yuzhou cavalry had openly entered the city and taken over all military affairs. Sure enough, the battlefield was the best whetstone. Yu Wandao, who was previously only eye-catching because of his overly handsome appearance, was still extraordinarily handsome. However, there was already an iron-blooded and cold temperament on his body that was completely natural. Su Fengnian said softly, the situation at Gourd Mouth in Yuzhou is not optimistic. 10,000 against 20,000. 12,000 killed and no more than 3,000 casualties. This great victory of yours is a timely reign. You can also remove that part of your title as a general. In the future, no one in Yuzhou will question your ability to lead troops. This battle between the two armies might even be regarded as a classic battle by future militarists. Yu Wandao said calmly, but a victory like this that doesn't affect the overall situation. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, although the Liang imperial court will turn a blind eye to this and will even purposely suppress the situation in Jibei, this is good news for Beiliang. The defending army of Yuzhou also needs a victory like this. Yu Wandao frowned. We don't lack war horses and provisions. However, only 6,000 of the 10,000 cavalrymen can mount an assault on Gourd Mouth. However, each of them can ride 3 horses. But the problem now is that not only does Beimang know our intention, they can also make countermeasures. I'm afraid that Gu Jiantang will continue to turn a blind eye to this. Besides, Wei Jingtang will soon lose his official position. Yuan Tingshan, who is in charge of Jibei, can even send the 6,000 private soldiers of Li family from Yanbao to defend against horizontal water silver harriers. When that happens, Wei Jingtang will have a hard time defending horizontal water city. The imperial court and Jibei will not give him this chance. Su Fengnian, who had been patiently listening to Yu Luandao, suddenly turned his head and looked at this young general with the least experience in the Yuzhou army. He smiled and said nothing. Yu Luandao, whose lips were dry and bleeding, turned his head. He thought something was wrong and subconsciously touched his face. Su Fengnian retracted his gaze and said with a smile, Yu Luandao, Yuzhou needs a general like you who can win tough battles and also understand the rules of the imperial court. Yu Luandao hesitated for a moment, then said seriously, I'm glad to see your highness in Jibei. Su Fengnian nodded and said, Jibei is not Beimang's territory. Let Li Yong do whatever he wants. Too bad Wei Jingtang will never agree to return to Yuzhou with us, or I would have tied him up. If that's the case, let's take a short rest and recuperate. Then we'll go to the mouth of the calabash. Yu Luandao nodded and said with a deep voice, when the battle ended, I've already sent out 400 scouts. On one hand, it was to prevent those scattered Beimang cavalry from causing any trouble, and on the other hand, it was to keep a close eye on Gu Jiantang's eastern front. Judging from the news we've received in the past 2 days, Lang Xin's remaining troops have lost their determination to fight. They are only thinking about how to explain the crushing defeat to the general of Beimang's eastern front. Even if Beimang dares to send more soldiers into Jibei and give their warhorses an extra pair of legs, these barbarians will never be able to catch up with our pace. Yu Luandao quickly added, but there are still a few famous generals in the eastern front of Beimang. The emperor of Beimang has to go on a tour throughout the year, and according to the seasons his royal tent is called Jibu. 4 young men from Beimang are given this honor. Tuoba Bodhisattva's eldest son is Chun Jibu, who has just become the leader of the Southern Dynasty's strategist. Zhong Shentong's son is Xia Jibu, the general of Yozhou's vanguard. As for the eastern front of Beimang, there are 2 Jibu, Qiu and Dong, who are outstanding generals that Hui Lilu and Lang Xin can't compare with. If one of them comes with an elite cavalry, it will be much more troublesome. Speaking of this, Yu Luandao, who always gave the impression of a cultured and refined general, could not help but curse. Does Gu Jiantang's eastern army only know how to eat shit? Su Fengnian could not hold back his laughter and said, that's enough. Li Yong has always been like this. Don't expect any icing on the cake. No matter what we do, we always plan to hit them when they are down. Amidst the twilight, Yu Luandao nodded with a gloomy face. Late that night, Su Fengnian, who had never revealed his identity, received a spy report from Hai Dongqing. He asked me Fengjie to find Yu Luandao, who had yet to take off his armor and rest. He told him that Wugong City was breached by Beimang's vanguard in just 1 day. Yu Luandao hurried to a side courtyard of the Silver Harrier General's mansion where Su Fengnian was temporarily staying. Su Fengnian was sitting on a stone bench. When Yu Luandao came near, he raised his head and said, we will depart tomorrow morning with the 6,000 cavalry. The other 1,000 or so soldiers who are more heavily injured will stay in Silver Harrier for the time being. Whether Beimang's reinforcements come or Yuan Tingshan's tripping, we will leave Silver Harrier and return to Yuzhou. Yu Luandao nodded. This general will give the order immediately. Suddenly, a voice came from behind him. I will accompany you out of the calabash. Yu Luandao turned around abruptly. His expression was extremely complicated. There was shock, worry, and even more joy. Su Fengnian waved his hand. Mi Fengjie waited until Yu Luandao left the courtyard before asking worriedly, Your Highness, is this really appropriate? Su Fengnian did not say anything. He closed his eyes and rested until dawn. At dawn, Su Fengnian opened his eyes. For some reason, Yu Luandao came to the courtyard with a heavy expression. He seemed to be asking for forgiveness, saying that the army might be delayed for 2 hours. Su Fengnian asked him what was the matter. Yu Luandao looked like he wanted to say something, but he did not. Su Fengnian frowned as he stared at the young general who shone brilliantly in the Battle of Jibei. Whether it was the rash advance of the army when they galloped for hundreds of miles, or the forced order in the army, or the timing and angle of the attack, or the freedom of the enemy's cavalry to escape from the battlefield, or the final pursuit that expanded the victory, the pride of Yu family had proven that even in Bailiang, where famous generals gathered, there was still a place for Yu Luandao. Since Yu Luandao did not want to say the reason, the furious Su Fengnian decided to follow Yu Luandao and see for himself. Su Fengnian, Yu Dilong, Mi Fengjie and Fan Shaochai, 4 riders, followed behind Yu Luandao and 2 deputy generals. 20 riders, led by a Yuzhou scout, galloped wildly out of the city toward the northeast direction for an hour. Chapter 1388. Along the way, there were villages and forts that were in a mess. Although this front line wasn't in the path of Beimang's 20,000 men, Hui Lilu and Lang Xin had lost close to 1,000 men after the battle. These stragglers would flee at the mere sight of 40 to 50 Beimang cavalry. However, the small villages to the north of the Hengshui River had suffered a calamity. The 600 Hengshui cavalry had been out in pursuit for the past few days, but after the initial panic, groups of 20 to 30 Mang cavalry continued to converge. Among them, there was a group of 200 Beimang cavalry that had clashed head-on with the Hengshui cavalry. Both sides had suffered heavy losses. Moreover, in the desert beyond the Great Wall, not to mention a few hundred or a few dozen cavalry, even if there were thousands or tens of thousands of cavalry, it would be like searching for a needle in a haystack once they left the city passes. When Yu Luandao's 400 elite scouts encountered the Beimang cavalry in the wilderness, they didn't take the initiative to attack. They were only responsible for gathering intelligence. The Mang cavalry dared to fight with the Hengshui cavalry, but when they saw the Yuzhou cavalry equipped with light crossbows and sabers, they took the initiative to retreat far away even though they had an absolute advantage in numbers. Generally speaking, they minded their own business. However, if the Yuzhou scouts encountered a small group of Mang cavalry and casually gained some military merit, neither Yu Luandao nor the lieutenant general had any objections. After all, why would they need a reason to kill a few more Beimang barbarians? However, the reason why Yu Luandao was so quiet today was because out of the 5 scouts, only one of them had returned to Silver Sparrow City to bring back the latest news. This news couldn't even be considered a military intelligence of any significance. That scout said that they had encountered 60 northern Mang barbarians in a village outside the city. According to the rules of the Northern Liang scouts, each team would fight against one target. Their side only needed to send back information. Due to the great disparity in numbers, they would not have to bear the crime of retreating without fighting. Moreover, these Yuzhou scouts had just returned from further north. They weren't supposed to fight with the Beimang cavalry in the first place. They needed to return to the city immediately and pass on the military intelligence to the cavalry camp. Yu Luandao wasn't just angry at the captain for disobeying the regulations, he felt more helpless. In Bailiang, where military law was the most important, those 4 scouts might not even be able to keep the military merit they had earned. Yu Luandao didn't know how to report this to the king of Bailiang, who was in the Yuzhou cavalry. In the cool border army, retreating from battle, lying about military intelligence, and killing innocent people were the 3 capital crimes. However, disobeying regulations were also crimes. The vice-general of Yochi, Shi Yulu, glanced at the 4 strange riders behind the troop and whispered to Yu Luandao, "The 4 scouts must have died in battle. How do we report this?" Yu Luandao showed a rare pained expression. "Report it as it is." As the leader of the 400 scouts, if Fanfan had heard such cold-blooded words before the Battle of Jibei, he would have long cursed and scolded Yu Luandao. But after the battle, all the soldiers of Yu province now had great admiration for Yu Luandao. Fanfan whispered, "General Yu, can't you make an exception? How about we ignore their previous military merit and just report that they encountered a large group of Mang cavalry and 4 of them died on their way back to the south?" Yu Luandao didn't say anything. The cavalry galloped into the village near the river. The corpses of the villagers could be seen everywhere. The village, which should have had 40 to 50 families, was now completely deserted. Only a few willows with bent branches outside the village were spitting out a few patches of green in this early spring when all living things should be growing. On the wheat drying field in front of a cottage to the north of the village, they saw the corpses of a family of 5. 2 old men were hacked to death by the Baimang war sabers at the door. The middle-aged man who was supposed to go to the fields to sow wheat was still clutching his hoe after he died. His son's head was right in front of him. The young headless body was closer to his mother. The woman was stripped naked and raped by the Baimang cavalry. Her limbs were chopped off. The young scout sobbed and said, "The sergeant couldn't stand it and asked me to bring the military intelligence back to Silver Sparrow City. Then he said that he died in battle further north and asked me to ignore the 3 of them. I didn't want to leave, so the sergeant kicked me and said that all 5 of them died here. What should we do about the military intelligence?" On the wheat drying field, the cold blades and light crossbows of the 4 Yuzhou scouts were taken away. Their armors were taken away, and only 4 corpses were left. One of them died under the mud wall. The arm holding the blade was chopped off by the Baimang cavalry and placed on his head. 2 of them died on the wheat drying field. The sergeant's corpse was tied to a long bench and used as a target. His body was full of bloody holes caused by arrows. Yu Wandao, Shi Yulu, and Fan Fan didn't say anything. It wasn't that they hadn't seen crueler scenes. In the north of Bailiang, when was there not a year where one side didn't die? Which one of them hadn't collected the corpses of their fellow Bailiang soldiers? However, this wasn't Bailiang. This was Ji Province. The old scout, Fan Fan, who could clearly call out the names of the 4 men, said softly with reddened eyes, "It's not worth it. You didn't die for anything." Then, Fan Fan saw the young man with the thick fur coat walking towards the sergeant's corpse. Fan Fan strode forward and wanted to push the young man away. "I didn't see you when we were fighting on the battlefield. Now that the war is over, you're still wearing a fur coat that the 4 of us who died in battle couldn't even afford in their entire lives. Why are you pretending to be a good person? I don't care which noble family you're from in Ji Province." Fan Fan stretched out his hand and shouted, "Get lost. As long as Bailiang isn't completely wiped out, outsiders like you won't have the chance to collect our corpses." But Fan Fan suddenly realized that he couldn't push the young man away. Chapter 1389. The man crouched down with his back to the crowd and slowly loosened the cold rope around the corpse. He took off the fur coat and wrapped it around the corpse. Fan Fan angrily pulled out the cold saber at his waist. At the same time, even Shi Yulu began to pull out his saber. An old man gently walked to the side of the young man. Immediately, the entire wheat field was filled with a majestic and fierce sword aura. Yu Luandao said in a low voice, "Fan Fan, stop. Don't be impudent." Fan Fan was stunned. Yu Luandao's unwarranted obstruction made this man, who had been on the battlefield for 20 years, feel even more grief and indignation. The moment he raised his saber and charged forward, he saw the young man, after putting the fur coat on the corpse, grab his own face with his 5 fingers like hooks and peel off his face, bit by bit. He heard the man mumble to himself, "Yes, your deaths were not worth it. You died in Ji Province, in a foreign land. Even Liang couldn't protect the common people. Why did you Yuzhou cavalry still care even though you knew it was death? You knew you were defying the Bailiang scouts' orders, but you still cared?" The man gently closed the eyes of the scout who died with remaining grievances. He smiled bitterly and said, "If it were 3 years ago, I wouldn't have understood either. At that time, I thought only the heroes of Jianghu would help when they saw injustice. But when I really entered Jianghu, when I visited both Liang and Baimang, I realized that it wasn't the case. Even the heroes of Jianghu are not as stupid as you." The young man raised his head and looked at the only living person left among the 5 scouts. It was the young Yuzhou scout. He asked, "What are your names?" The young scout blurted out, "Fan Liao, Hu Zhonghan, Zhao Dian. I only know that the sergeant's surname is Lu. He never showed us his military plate." Fan Fan said, "Lu Qingqing. He's been in the army for 12 years. He started out as a crossbowman in Liangzhou. He should have been a marksman a long time ago. All these years, as long as he had a little military merit, he would give it to his brothers. And this kid he's called Lu Tao. He's never been a coward. Not only did the young man, who looked like he came from an aristocratic family, help the corpse stand up, but he also used the rope to tie the corpse to him. He took the corpse off the horse, and the dead and the living rode on the same horse. He said, "You Landau, take the 3 corpses back to Silver Sparrow City first. Lead the 6,000 cavalrymen and rush to the mouth of the gourd. I will be able to catch up with your army in half a day. Remember to bring an extra set of armor when you leave the city. Scout Lu Tao, you need to wait here. I'll help you get back the crossbow blade and armor. When the time comes, I'll let you bring the squad leader and those things back." As he spoke, the old, young, and young woman also mounted their horses. Yu Luandao looked at the man who was carrying the corpse of the sergeant on his back. Su Fengyan said softly, "I'll send Lu Chengqing off." The 4 riders galloped away. The killing intent of the 4 riders was so strong that even Deputy General Shi Yulu and Scout Captain Fan Fen felt their scalps tingle. Shi Yulu, who had no idea what was going on, could not help but ask after he carried a corpse on his back and mounted the horse, "General, what is this?" Yu Luandao was in a daze. He was born in the rich Jiangnan of the Central Plains. He had traveled to many places when he was studying. Throughout the year, he could hear the chatter of famous scholars, the sound of guqin in the forest, the laughter of brothels, and the sound of toasting. But only Bailiang, who fought to the death without words and mourned without sound. Yu Luandao pulled out the famous blade, Great Luan, and pointed to the south. "Please open your eyes and look at me, Bailiang." The cavalrymen quickly left the village. Fan Fen asked gloomily, "General Yu, who is that guy? Is he a big shot in the Liang dynasty?" Yu Luandao shook his head. "Other than Bailiang, who is worthy?" Yu Luandao laughed. "Him? His name is Su Fengyan." Shi Yulu and Fan Fun, including all the generals of the hidden cavalry, were stunned. They suddenly felt as if sand had entered their eyes. Fan Fen suddenly turned his horse's head and shouted, "General Yu, I'll quickly tell Lu Tao." He said that the person he admires the most in his life is the person who single-handedly killed Wang Xianji. Lu Tao also said that he would never see him again in his life. "Let's see if he dares to believe me this time." A young captain suddenly said timidly, "General Yu, I also admire him. Otherwise, let me wait in the village for half a day. I promise I can keep up with the army. If I can't, I will cut off my own head." Yu Luandao glared. "Is your brain flooded with water? Next, His Highness will follow us to the mouth of the calabash. You can look at His Highness however you want, as long as you want. At that time, as long as you have the ability to follow behind His Highness, I won't stop you." The young captain thought that it was right and smiled awkwardly. In less than half a day, the 4 abandoned their horses and rushed over the desert, catching up to the 6,000 Yuzhou cavalrymen. When the 6,000 cavalrymen saw the young man in the lead, they all unsheathed their Bailiang sabers to show their respect. The 4 mounted their horses. Su Fengyan took the armor tossed to him by a young captain and put it on. It was unknown who was the first to shout those 3 words, but even Yu Luandao was cheering. "Great General!" Back then, on the training grounds at the mouth of Bailiang's calabash, Su Fengyan had made his first appearance in the border army, but at that time, he was only wearing a python robe. Thus, this was Su Fengyan's first time wearing armor to break through the enemy lines. He turned his head and seemed to see an old man riding side by side with him. Su Fengyan bit his lip and took a deep breath. When he looked again, all he could see was 10,000 li of yellow sand. He unsheathed his Bailiang saber and urged his horse to gallop. He roared, "Bailiang, fight to the death! Bailiang, fight to the death!" The 6,000 cavalrymen rushed out of the calabash with the resolve to die. Not only did they want to cut off that vast supply line from Baimang's southern court to the mouth of the calabash, they also wanted to completely destroy it.